Hello. I wanted to share something that happened to me last year. It may not be the scariest thing you've come across, but being in that moment really scared me and put some things into perspective. It started out as one of those typical weeks. My wife, who at the time was 7 months pregnant, was having a rough time. Her car had broken down and had been in the shop, so we were down to one car, which we were able to make work. Based on our schedules, I worked later than her. I typically dropped her off, and then sometimes I picked her up, or she might get a ride from a coworker, depending on how quickly she needed to get home. She was having a very stressful week and reaching towards the end of the pregnancy. She was just having a really rough time. It was our first kid, so she was pretty worn out and was a trooper throughout the whole thing, even during the difficult moments. On this night, she texted me saying that she was going to get a ride from her coworker since she was running behind, and telling me that it was another rough day for her. She had a larger and longer lunch because there was a corporate outing, which is probably what set her back too, and with how her appetite had been, or lack thereof, I knew she wasn't going to want dinner either. So I had some leftovers and just hung around at home until she got there. But as I sat around doing nothing like a bum, I decided I wanted to do something nice for her instead. With the weeks that she's had, I knew just the thing that would make her smile. She's been obsessed with this gelato from the ice cream shop throughout her pregnancy, and I thought that I would buy her a pint of it. I mean, when you don't want dinner, you typically just want ice cream, right? So I started feeling like a genius and did some things here and there to prepare to go. I killed some time by picking up the living room, swapping out the laundry, and then before I left, I looked at the dishes in the sink. We had a few things in there from dinner, our bowls from breakfast, and then I had my reheated dinner and they hadn't been done yet. I know some people would call that lazy or whatever, but my goal the night before was just making sure the wife was comfortable after having a breakdown at work. So I know that I needed to do the dishes too, and that was the plan, but I wanted to get the gelato before she got home. So I told myself that I would go get it real quick, get home, do the dishes, and then she could come back to a clean house and a lovely treat. Don't worry, I'm not trying to justify my laziness. It is all relevant to the story, I promise. The drive was fine, as it was only about 15 minutes from our house, if that. The place was very colorful and modern, with the back wall full of those little Polaroids and Post-its that anyone could add to. It was always fun to look through them. I got in there, and there was a couple sitting at one of the tables enjoying their time, and one girl behind the counter. I'd seen her there before, a younger girl with short black hair, always very chipper and willing to let my wife sample different flavors, even though she still always got the same thing: pistachio and dark chocolate. Usually we just got the small cups for us, but today, I was spending a bit more to get a whole pint for her, and a little German chocolate cup for myself. The girl working there said that I was a good person, and then asked where my wife was, and we had a small conversation about all that as she rang me up. I paid and thanked her, and then began walking back to my car feeling like I was doing a good thing. As I got in my car and buckled in, my wife texted me again saying that they were just about to leave, and I responded to her. I thought this was even better because it gave me enough time to get back and get those dishes done. That's when all of my plans came crashing down. It took my brain a moment to process what exactly was happening. There was a loud pop, and at first I thought it may have been a car backfiring, but then I heard the scream. I looked around and back towards the big window into the gelato shop, and saw a man standing there pointing a gun at the young girl that had just rung me up. I just remember staring into the building, trying to process if what I was seeing was real. I was just in there. I tried looking around and I could just barely see the top of the couple's head that had been sitting in there, just over the store stickers. I didn't know if anyone was hurt, but the girl looked terrified as this guy was clearly yelling at her. I finally came to and told myself that I needed to do something. I didn't know if anyone else had called the cops yet, but I had. I finally called them and reported what was happening, as I lied across my front seats, not wanting the guy to see me in the car and possibly come out. I stayed in that position for what felt like hours. The gelato now in a bag on my floorboard. Then I heard the sirens. There was another gunshot and a bunch of shouting, and I finally looked up over the dash when I heard them shouting, "Gun." They had cuffed the guy with the gun, and another cop and paramedic were inside the store. And that's when I looked around and saw the ambulance. I was worried that someone had been injured, and based on where the paramedic was, it must have been the couple. I remember being so terrified and feeling so bad for them. They were probably just out on a nice date or enjoying a little treat like myself, only to be shot at. I stayed in my car, not knowing if I should get out and tell someone that I called or just leave. So I rolled down my window and waited for someone to notice me. I did take the time to text my wife that I stepped out, thinking now she would beat me home, kicking myself for the whole thing. I didn't tell her where I was going because it was supposed to be a surprise. I didn't even leave a note. So if I had been in there, or shot even, she would have no idea where I was. And I wouldn't have even been able to answer my phone if she did try to contact me. And that was a terrifying thought for me. Thankfully, one of the cops did notice me, and so I started talking to him. I told him why I was there and that I had called it in. He was trying to be optimistic, I'm sure, but he told me that it was a good thing I got there and left when I had, and said how the other man in there had been shot, but it wasn't life-threatening, which did make me feel a little better. Finally, I got to go home. Now with the gelato, more of a soup, and tell my wife everything that had happened. She freaked out. She cried and she laughed. In that order, too. She was scared to hear that I was sort of involved in the whole thing, and being in her current state, she cried for me, and cried for the kind gesture of getting her the gelato, and then laughed that it would be our luck with the week we were having. But she also made a very good point as we spoke about it. If I had stayed and done the dishes before I went, like I had debated, I may have been walking into that store at the same time that the gunman showed up. I could have already been inside or maybe even walking to the door with him. And that terrified me. A simple change like that, a simple change in the order of things that I did, and I could have been in there and this could have gone a lot worse. And the cops showed up about the time the operator told me they would, so did anyone else even call for help, or was it luck that I would be out there and call it in? It was one of those, I almost literally dodged a bullet. I learned about a week later from the news and things found between local pages and social media that the shooter was the ex of another girl that had worked there. He showed up for whatever reason to try and talk to her, and when the girl told him she wasn't there, he didn't believe her and started yelling. That's what made the other guy that was there try to stand between them, and that's why he got shot. I saw a post from the local news where his fiancée was interviewed and ended up finding her on Facebook and pieced together more of the story. So, overall, it was a crazy situation that shouldn't have happened. And with just a few choices I made, I nearly avoided it. Because if I was in there, I think I would have done the same thing that man did to protect that young girl. She was too young, too full of life, and I hope that that didn't cause lasting damage to her. So, there you have it. Other than my kid being born, that was probably one of the scariest things I've ever experienced. And if there's anything to learn here, it's that sometimes procrastination can save lives. The dishes can wait. Life is unpredictable enough as it is. Hey, Raven. I hope you and Patience are doing well, and I'm glad the move is finally over. Same. I know I still have quite a few stories I promised to share, but this one actually happened recently and ended up being an entire situation that I couldn't help but share. Because I was sure that someone was about to kill me. Trigger warning for anyone listening who doesn't like guns or threats of violence. As we all know, here and there, my wife and I will drive for delivery services. DoorDash for me, Spark for her, to make extra money to pay for the things we need. We recently had to do this when an unprecedented issue with my wife's transmission occurred, and we had to dip into our funding to take care of it. And fortunately, we were able to get it fixed. We started taking turns driving delivery for our respective apps, and it's been going smoothly for about a week or two, and then this situation happened. I got a DoorDash order for a pizza delivery. Yeah, I always get a bunch of pizza deliveries, and headed out around midday on a Monday. I did the usual stuff, showed up, verified, picked the food up, and started on my way to the location. When I arrived, I noticed that it was a trailer park tucked away in a slightly wooded area, and the initial pin took me to the wrong house. So I called the customer, who gave me a vague direction, and ended his statement in a country-soaked, "Now you better be careful out here, brother," and hung up. Yeah, his instructions didn't help at all. I ended up starting the GPS again on the DoorDash app, and it took me to a small one-lane road at the back of the trailer park, which apparently led to the RV side of the property deep inside a wooded area. The road paving ended and turned into a mess of roots, dips, and divots, and the surrounding vegetation was thick and dense, not to mention lined with trees. So there wasn't anywhere to turn around and go back. I had to press forward. I felt a little uneasy, as I always did whenever I had to travel somewhere off-road, even though I spent a lot of my teen and young adult years learning to track, scout, and hike. Training or not, the sensation that something feels off doesn't go away. And in fact, it gets stronger with experience. Anyways, back to the story. The road went about a mile into the trees, winding slowly to the right and left, and then I passed by what I could only describe as the remains of an old pickup truck that looked as if someone had set it on fire at one point. And the passenger side door had several holes in it, which I immediately identified as bullet holes. As if that wasn't enough, up ahead of me was an old Ford Crown Vic parked in the middle of the one-lane road. I rolled to a stop and called my wife, something that we both do whenever we feel odd or uneasy about a situation, and she picked up just as a middle-aged man with a red bandana on his head walked from behind the car ahead of me, and stared at me intensely. He had brown hair with silver in it, and a full beard and mustache. He was wearing a dusty, torn black t-shirt, camouflage cargo pants, and a gun on his right hip. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and began giving my wife descriptions of what I saw and telling her to call it in. The man started smiling, got into the Crown Vic, and I immediately began backing up the road in the most nope way that I could without seeming suspicious. But the man didn't waste any time pulling forward with his car and bringing it all the way up to the front bumper of mine. Now, driving backwards is a challenge in and of itself, and doing it on uneven terrain is even much more challenging. But I also had a long, winding road to back travel, plus having this crazy man in front of me driving up against my car. He had his phone to his ear for a bit and then flipped it to landscape, which I knew meant that he was filming me, and then he placed it on a holder in his car and began revving his engine as he jerked forward, insinuating he would hit me. I did my best backing up until I rounded one of the many turns, and the man rolled his car to my right and motioned for me to roll down my window firmly. I tried to use the DoorDash support to call 911 and report an issue with the delivery, only to find that the app had frozen and remained stuck on the GPS. My wife told me to call the police, and I began swiping my phone to do just that, when the man yelled out that he was a police officer and to roll the window down before things got ugly. So, I did roll down my passenger side window, about halfway, and he leaned over to talk. "You don't belong out here. The hell you doing out here?" he demanded. "I have a DoorDash delivery and this is where the GPS took me," I told him, trying to remain as calm as I could and hopefully diffuse the situation. The man just laughed at me and shook his head and said something about how dumb I was. Then his face became very serious. "Boy, you don't belong out here. This is our land and you can either get the hell out or we'll take you out. You got no business here and I ain't gonna tell you again," the man demanded. I told him that I was trying to get out of the area and that him driving up on the car and filming me wasn't helping, and he just shook his head and basically dismissed me, until I mentioned that I had a dash cam and the body cam I wear when I drive for DoorDash. And he told me that he was a police officer himself with the local department, and that he got my picture, got video of me trespassing, and that I tripped some alarm on his property border when I drove down the one-lane road. He also added that, if he wanted to, he could arrest me or take me out for being on his property without permission. I told him there wasn't any point in threatening me and that I was already trying to leave, because I wasn't doing anything illegal in the first place. I mentioned there were no signs or markings for private property anywhere, and he referred to the battered truck I saw earlier and said that it should have been warning enough. "Tell you what, turn around right here, get the hell on, and I better not ever see your stupid ass out this way again, or I'm not going to give you the chance," he told me. And he backed his car up a bit so that I could slowly turn around, and then he proceeded to follow me out of the one-lane road, and all the way back to the main area of the trailer park. And there were a few people outside, and they all watched me as I drove through, and the, quote, officer behind me kept his car all the way up on my rear bumper, no doubt filming me. As soon as I got near the front of the trailer park, he pulled around and stopped his car in front of me and got out. He motioned for me to roll down my window and asked me again where I was supposed to be. I told him for the third time now that I was delivering a DoorDash order, and the pin took me to the back of the property, which I now know is the wrong area. He asked me for the lot number, and then got on his phone and stepped away to call someone and then came back. "Alright, take this road, turn left by the pool. Customer's gonna meet you there to get their stuff, and then you've got about 5 minutes to get out of here after that. Don't come back here and don't make a scene," he told me, and then he got in his car and drove off. I did as he said. I delivered the food and then I left as fast as I could. On the way out of the trailer park, I did see something that I hadn't seen before. Several pickup trucks were parked near the front gate with certain flags on them, and pulled over to the left shoulder side of the entrance was the officer in the Crown Vic. I had to reset my phone to unfreeze the DoorDash app, and I did report the issue to DoorDash because everything that happened was due to an issue with their app. They transferred me to about 4 different people, and one of them mentioned that they heard I had some app issues. I told them in no uncertain terms that I almost died over a $4 order because the stupid app took me into hostile territory due to an incorrect PIN. And the app froze when I tried to use the emergency features they bragged about having for drivers. "Next time, please use the Dasher Support security option to ensure your safety," the operator told me, and I literally yelled back, "Next time, make sure it actually works in the first place." I got transferred to another operator, and they did create a case. They marked that location as unsafe for dashing, and sent me a bunch of materials for a formal report. So, that's my story of how I almost died over a $4 DoorDash delivery. Brandon Swanson's story. When you've just completed high school and are just starting your college years, it's not uncommon for someone to want to decompress and celebrate a little bit. On the night of May 13th, that's exactly what 19-year-old Brandon Swanson was trying to do with friends. He left his home in Marshall, Minnesota, and traveled a few minutes away to Lind and joined some friends at a party. Around 10:30, Brandon leaves the party and heads to Canby, where the college campus that he attends, Minnesota West Community and Technical College, is. We do know that at the party in Lind that Brandon had indulged in a few adult beverages, and while it's hard to trust the judgment of other impaired people, other people that had been at the party with him said that he wasn't acting overly impaired, or as if he were past the point that he could safely get himself home. In Canby, we know that Brandon had himself a single shot of whiskey, and at some point before midnight left for the 30-mile drive home back to Marshall. Now, Brandon's evening had consisted of him basically making a kind of triangle, with him beginning by heading southwest to Lind, then further west to Canby. The drive from Canby back to Marshall would have been the most direct and technically easiest portion of this trip, as the two towns are connected by Highway 68. However, for reasons I think we can all surmise, Brandon instead opted to take the back roads home. This did add a bit of time to his trip, but he still should have made it home in a fairly timely fashion. This, however, was not to be. Around 2 a.m., his parents received a phone call from Brandon, saying that he had hung his car up in a ditch. He was unsure of exactly where he was, but he said that he thought he was near Lind, and he asked his parents if they could come and help him. Between 1:54 and 2:14 a.m., there are multiple calls between Brandon and his parents as he tries to explain to them just where he is. During one of these calls, he stresses to his parents that he is uninjured from the accident. He describes to them being somewhere between Lind and Marshall just off Highway 23, and tells them he's on the left side of the road. This is where things actually start to get interesting, because when his vehicle is eventually located, he is nowhere near Highway 23 or Lind. His car is found 25 miles where he thought he was, near the town of Taunton. This entire scenario suggests that he was impaired enough when he left the party that he got himself turned around. What is really indicative of this is the fact that Brandon had lived in this area his whole life. And back in 2008, GPS and smartphones weren't as prevalent as they are today. So, when Brandon would have been learning to drive, he would have actually had to have learned the roads and landmarks, as unlike today, he couldn't just put in an address and then follow the blue line. When you consider his choice to take back roads instead of the main highway, which would have been the most direct and fastest route home, I think we can safely assume that it was to avoid a possible confrontation with police. As at this time of the year, when school is ending, the police know all too well that the kids are going to start getting up to things, such as underage drinking or driving under the influence, etc. They possibly even would have sobriety checkpoints to check for people who are driving under the influence. During the multiple phone calls with his parents, one thing is clear. He genuinely wanted their help and was trying to get them to locate him. He wasn't just jerking them around and trying to send them on a wild goose chase or anything. Though it is worth noting that he only called his parents as a last resort. Initially, he had tried to reach out to friends for help, but he'd gotten no answer from anyone that might have been closer to his location. Thus, with his back against the wall, he called his parents, seeking help in his situation. During the final phone call with his parents, Brandon tells them that he is walking towards what he believes to be the town lights of Lind. However, at roughly the 47-minute mark, Brandon says, "Oh shit," before the line goes dead. At the time this happened, his parents were searching for him and his car around the Lind area. At 6:30 a.m., his parents contacted police to report him missing. The initial response was the one that we have all come to expect in these kinds of stories, and the officer actually told Brandon's mother that the 19-year-old had every right to be missing. And the initial response was greatly delayed. Even when the police did begin to search for the young man, they were still searching in the Lind area where Brandon believed himself to be. However, it wouldn't be until later that afternoon when police began checking cell phone data that the search area was expanded to the Taunton area, where his car was found, exactly as he had told his parents. Despite a very, very exhaustive search, no sign of Brandon has ever been found. The thing that did strike people as odd was the fact that his glasses were found inside the car. This came off as strange because he was legally blind in one eye. Before long, Air Patrol and K-9 units were dispatched to search the area. One of the K-9s followed Brandon's scent trail to the Yellow Medicine River, but there was still no definitive sign of Brandon, nor anything that could suggest what had possibly befallen him. So, while we have no definitive answers to this case, what we do have are some dark theories. One theory states that, while walking in the dark, he had fallen into the Yellow River and drowned. Another theory states that he may have crossed the river and then, due to cold temperatures, fallen victim to hypothermia. Other theories say that he might have fallen into an old abandoned well, of which there are many in the area, and this would explain why no real trace of him had ever been located. While we don't know just what happened to this bright young man, it can be said that some good came from his disappearance, because the result of this has been the passage of Brandon's Law, which states that police are to begin investigating the disappearance of an adult straight away, regardless of their age. While a hollow comfort, perhaps, this law just may help a lot of people be found and returned safely home than otherwise sharing Brandon's fate of being missing for nearly 20 years and counting. And, of course, if you have any information on Brandon Swanson's whereabouts or fate, please contact Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehensions, the BCA, or the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. Contact info in the description below. Hi, Raven. I've been listening to your Glitch in the Matrix stories for years, and I only just recently started listening to other scary and strange stories that you have on your channel. And today, I realized I have one of those stories to tell. So, I live in New Zealand, and about 5 years ago, my friend and I were volunteering on an uninhabited island called Matuihi, and if I mispronounce that, I apologize. Nobody lives here because it has many native and endangered animals like the kiwi and tuatara. We were helping to cut walking paths and plant native trees. The only people on the island were my friend and I, who were both girls in our early 20s, as well as the caretaker and his wife, who were the only people to live on the island permanently. We stayed 3 nights and would get time off working each day to explore the island. On the last day, my friend and I went separate directions, and although it was May, which is the middle of winter in New Zealand, I went to the beach to sunbathe and have a swim, because it was very sunny. The walk from camp to the beach was about 40 minutes. I was laying on the beach when I noticed a boat about 50 meters offshore. There was a naked man standing on the deck. I imagined it must be a couple having a romantic holiday together, and that they must not have expected anyone to be on this beach, as it's usually deserted. So I tried not to look in that direction to give privacy to whoever it was. Of course, I couldn't help myself but glance that way every so often, wondering if I would spot another naked person with the man. I was giggling a little to myself, imagining how embarrassed they would be when they saw me. After about 10 minutes of being there, I looked over and I noticed that the man was still alone, still naked, and he was now getting the dinghy boat ready to take to the shore. He was looking in my direction. getting on board the little boat, and then he started to head my way. Alone, and still naked. All of a sudden, I was very scared. The camp where I was staying was quite a ways back, and I was completely alone on the beach with a naked man coming towards me. I got up and walked toward the bush where the path back was, and I kept looking over my shoulder. He got off the dinghy and started walking toward me, still naked. There was about 100 meters between us, and I started running, terrified by now. I ran as fast as I could towards the camp. I continued to look back, and I saw that he started running too, chasing me. At the time, I was not very fit, and I had a long way to go to get back to where people were, and it was so incredibly scary. I ran as fast as I could, and he just kept following me. I would turn around every so often and see this naked man chasing behind me through the trees. I had a burning stitch in my side, and I thought that I couldn't physically keep running, but every time I would stop, I could hear or see him coming from behind me. I've never had to push myself to run like that in my life, but I knew that I could not stop. Finally, I got back to the camp and I told the caretaker. The man was nowhere to be seen. We called the police and they sent a police boat to his boat, but apparently he denied it and there was nothing they could do. Sometimes, I wonder what he would have done if he had caught up to me. Hey everyone. I'm at my wit's end and, frankly, starting to scare myself. I've been lurking here for a while, mostly reading other people's stories, but now I'm living something that I can't explain, and I need to know if anyone, has ever felt anything like this. Somewhere around 3 months ago, I was caught in a pretty chaotic situation downtown. Nothing super dramatic, but definitely jarring. I was waiting for the light to change at a really busy intersection when, out of nowhere, there was this unbelievably loud, high-pitched screech. Not like tires or metal, more like a pure vibrating frequency that seemed to vibrate through my bones. It lasted maybe a few seconds tops, but it was so disorienting that people actually stumbled and covered their ears. Everyone was looking around confused, but it just stopped. No crash, no explosion, no source. It was just a sudden, violent sound that vanished. No one knew what it was, and no one was able to explain it. We all just kind of laughed and said, wow, that was really weird, and then moved on with our lives. As I was trying to get my bearings, still a little dizzy, I made eye contact with this guy across the street. He was standing near a lamppost, looking just as bewildered and a little pale as I felt. Our eyes locked for a long moment. It wasn't a romantic thing, just this shared, intense, what the hell was that moment. We both just kind of nodded at each other, and then the crowd started moving again, and we went our separate ways. I thought nothing of it, just a weird blip in a mundane day. But then, about a week later, things started to get weird. I would be at home completely fine, and then I would randomly think of that guy, and I would get hit with this really intense wave of anxiety. It was like a cold dread washing over me completely unprovoked. Or I would get this weird metallic taste in my mouth, and would start to feel like I was going to get sick. Like spinning room, I'm about to lose my lunch levels of sick. This happened a few times. Enough that I made an appointment with my doctor, who is booked up for like 3 weeks, so it was 3 weeks out. Of course, as soon as I booked the appointment, it pretty much stopped. But then, other weird things would happen. I would be doing laundry, and again, I would suddenly think of that guy and just get angry. Like, filled with rage, angry. I would get this jarring flash of sensory input, some shock to my system, and I would literally want to scream. I felt like I was a child having a tantrum, just wanting to throw myself to the floor and scream, kick, and cry. I'm a fairly stable person, at least I like to believe that I am, and I have never had emotional issues like this. I kind of just dealt with this until my doctor's appointment. I did my best to explain what was going on without sounding like a crazy person. From what she could tell, I was fine. Not pregnant, no major issues on any of the tests or blood work. She had a specialist that she wants me to see, but that's a near future thing, as they are also booked up. But from what she could tell, I was perfectly healthy, and it was probably just a passing thing. Maybe it was just anxiety. It mostly subsided, but I would still randomly get hit with the emotional bursts, and it got so unsettling that I started trying to find that guy. I remembered his face pretty clearly, and the intersection. I spent way too much time scrolling through local news pages, looking at photos from nearby businesses on social media, just anything. It felt obsessive, but I had this gut feeling that he was connected. And then about a month ago, I found him. It was a photo from a local community event posted online. Same guy. I knew it instantly. I won't share his information, obviously, but confirming that he existed only made things worse. Since then, the connection, or whatever it is, has seemingly intensified. I feel constantly drained, like my own energy is being siphoned off. What I think are his emotions, which now often seem to be agitation or deep sadness or simmering resentment, hit me hard and often. Sometimes I hear what sounds like snippets of his thoughts. Not words that I understand, but that faint mental static or the emotional tone of a frustrated internal monologue. The worst part is that feeling of being watched. Not physically, but like a constant unseen awareness is directed at me. I'll be in my apartment alone and suddenly get this overwhelming sensation that he's, I don't know, feeling me, knowing what I'm doing. It makes my skin crawl. I have literally no idea what to do. I've tried meditating, tried to ignore it, and I even yelled for it to stop, but nothing is doing it. In fact, sometimes it feels like when I try to push it away, it gets worse, almost like a frustrated pushback. I know that I sound insane, I accept that. My friends would just tell me that I'm having a mental breakdown, which maybe I am, but I feel like I'm experiencing some sort of psychic link to someone that I've never met, and will likely never meet again. So I have to ask, what the hell do I do? Is this a soulmate thing? Or is this some kind of weird universal joke, and my life is the punchline? How do you even begin to cope with someone else's entire emotional landscape bleeding into your life like this, and you just can't escape it? I'm seriously getting scared for my mental health, and possibly my physical health, and I'm pretty sure the specialist is just going to tell me that I'm fine physically, that this is all mental. Well, let me tell you, I'm definitely feeling mental. Just a heads up, this is going to be a long story. I wanted to tell you about an ex-friend of mine named Lexi. Lexi and I had been best friends since I moved to the school district that she was in. We met in 6th grade and became close friends ever since. We did everything together, and stayed at each other's home all the time. Our parents even held a joint graduation party for the both of us, and we loved it. After high school, it just made sense that we should find a place together too. Word of advice, do not get a place together with your friend. Living with someone is completely different, but I learned that the hard way. We found the perfect little 2-bedroom apartment with reasonable rent, and I was genuinely excited to start this new chapter of our lives together. We sorted everything out, who got which room. Lexi wanted the smaller room because it had a large bay window in it, and she wanted to turn it into a reading nook. This worked for me because the other room was slightly bigger, with its own attached half-bathroom. We had a similar taste for decorations and did everything in pastels. Even found a vintage couch and dishes that matched our theme. The first few months were amazing. We made our own girls' night out together, where we would get ice cream and watch a movie or show together. We had friends over for small get-togethers or parties, and we just generally lived that young adult life that I'd always imagined. Lexi was so much fun, just as she was in high school. She was spontaneous and easy to be around, and I felt so lucky to be living with my best friend, sharing the bills, expenses, and chores. It honestly made it all worth it. But as we settled into our routine and got more comfortable, I started noticing some of Lexi's habits that I hadn't been aware of before. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't perfect either, I know. I had my quirks, like leaving my craft stuff scattered on the coffee table, or sometimes I would forget to take the trash out on pickup day. I left about an hour before her, so I usually took it out, but Lexi had some behaviors that struck me as genuinely unusual. The first thing that I noticed was how she handled the dishes, or typically, the lack thereof. When she finished eating, she would just place the plate in the sink as is. The thing is, she rarely finished eating everything on her plate. But instead of putting what was left in a container or scraping it into the trash can, she would just put it all in the sink. We didn't even have a garbage disposal in the sink, so she would just toss the plate with whatever was on it, bones on the plate, crust from her pizza, the cereal and milk in her bowl, straight into the sink. At first, I thought maybe she had just forgotten or was in a hurry, but it happened consistently. Every single meal. You would think you know how much you can eat and not get too much, but she always did and never finished it. So there was also that bit of wasting food that I didn't like either. I finally asked her about it, honestly just curious about it, and she just shrugged and said that's what she's always done. So I explained to her that since we didn't have a disposal, she has to scrape the food off into the trash first. The first time, she seemed to understand and agreed to stop doing that, which made me think, okay, problem solved, moving on. But that didn't happen. She didn't stop. She continued to do the same thing, unless I caught her walking in there, which I would tell her to scrape it, and she would. Otherwise, to the sink it went, and it became a constant pain point of me saying scrape it, and she would say that she forgot and would get to it. But if I didn't, she never would. I know it's not good either, but I didn't do the dishes for 2 days to see if she would, and she never did. The food sat there until I cleaned it up. Another strange habit was her approach to laundry. We had our own hookups in the apartments, and I would try to do laundry on several occasions, and she would have her clothes in there. No big deal. I just waited. But then I would go and check it for a few days and see the same clothing items sitting on top of the washer bin, and would have to remind her to change it out. She did this so often that the clothes would get that musty smell, and would have to be re-washed, taking even longer. I would eventually move her clothes to the dryer for her, but she got mad at me because something shrank and said that she hung it to dry. That was one of those talks we had to have, and I said that she then needed to set reminders for herself to change it out or something, because I can't do my own laundry if hers is sitting in the washer. But again, she didn't change. And I didn't want her to get mad at me for moving her stuff, so I just started using the community one. I didn't want to do that, because it meant that I would have to pay for it, but at least I knew I could get it done and have clean clothes. The third thing was her treatment of shared spaces. She would leave her stuff everywhere in the living room. Shoes were all over, even though we had a decent-sized shoe bench. I would trip over them all the time. She would leave food wrappers on the couch or tables and in the bathroom we shared with the shower. She would leave messes on the counter. If she spilled creams, makeup, or even toothpaste, she just left it. And I cleaned it up to not deal with it. I'm starting to think that telling her about it would do nothing anyways. We had a few arguments about these issues over the months, but we always made up afterward. I tried to keep in mind that it could also be a difference in upbringings. We both lived at home prior, but maybe her parents cleaned up after her more than I realized. But then, Lexi's behavior started shifting in more concerning ways. She became increasingly disrespectful and inconsiderate, going beyond just annoying habits. And it was starting to feel deliberate. She started borrowing my things without asking, and never returning them or giving them back dirty or damaged. She took a sweater from my closet, and I later found it crumpled up on the floor in the living room with a huge stain on it. My straightener actually went missing, and when I asked her about it, she said that she didn't recall ever using it. Then I went into her room while she was home, so she was aware, looking for our glasses because we were almost out, and there were none in the sink or dishwasher. She hid glasses in her room all the time. That is when I found my straightener on her dresser, caked in what I think was candle wax. I ended up just buying a new one, not wanting to take the time to clean it all up. But when I confronted her about it, she always acted like I was being unreasonable for caring about material things. It was less the items specifically and more her lack of care for someone else's stuff. But the final straw for me struck when I came home late one night, after pulling a double at work. We needed the extra hands. I wanted to save up some more money, and it got me out of the apartment, so I figured, why not? So, I came home around midnight, exhausted and ready for bed. As I entered the apartment, I heard the shower running, so I knew Lexi was already home. I made my way to my room to just pass out for the night, but froze in place as I opened my door. There was a naked man in my bed, looking at his phone. I remember being so terrified, not having a clue who the hell he was. So I ran into the bathroom where I hoped it was Lexi taking a shower and locked the door. She poked her head out from behind the curtain confused, and I told her there was some guy in my bed. Of all the reactions that she could have had, she laughed and said that it was just some guy she brought home. So I asked why the hell he was in my room, and she said it was because my bed was bigger and better for two people. I did have a queen bed, once again brought from my parents' house, and she had a full-sized bed, but that did not give her any reason nor permission to use my bed to do God knows what. And that's what I told her. I was furious. I told her that she wasn't allowed to just go in my room and take or use my stuff without asking. But the thing was, she didn't even seem to understand what the big deal was. And she was confused and offended that I was so mad about it. So, as she finished her shower, we had a bit of an argument about boundaries and how she was crossing them all. And I genuinely asked her what the hell was going on, if there was a reason she was acting this way, and she again seemed confused. I remember telling her that she had to be deliberately being disrespectful to me, or she was seriously not understanding what exactly she was doing wrong, and I didn't know which one was easier to believe. After this guy left my room, I tore all my sheets and blankets off my bed and tried to clean my mattress, until I ultimately just flipped it over. The next morning, after the guy was long gone, I tried to have a conversation with Lexi, a heart-to-heart to try and figure out what the hell was going on with her. But that did not go over well. She exploded, screaming that I was being a controlling bitch. And, well, she was practically throwing a tantrum. She started throwing things. She kicked over the floor lamp in the living room. She even broke this vase my mom had given us as a housewarming gift. I just watched in horror as my friend transformed into someone I did not recognize. Someone genuinely frightening. Even when she got into fights with her older brother, she was not like that. No, this was new. Not knowing what to do, and to avoid getting something thrown at me, I just locked myself in my room until she calmed down. I called my older sister to talk to her about what had happened as I sat in my closet. Yes, I turned the music on and literally sat in my closet and talked to her. I'd been telling her everything that was going on. My sister and I have always been really close. She offered to let me stay at her place until I got a new one if I wasn't planning on renewing the lease. All of this had taken place over several months, and we had about 5 months left on our lease. With how she was acting and treating me, I definitely did not want to renew with her, so I took the offer. I would tell the office that I was moving out, and Lexi that I wasn't renewing with her and get the hell out of there as soon as I could. I did my best to keep the peace between us, while figuring out the best approach for the living situation. Lexi continued on with her inconsiderate behaviors, but she completely stopped helping with basic household chores at that point. If I didn't clean it, it didn't get done. And I didn't want to live like that, so I did it. Even if I did look like her personal maid, I just didn't touch her room. Finally, we were 4 months out, and we would have to tell the office what we were doing within 60 days of our lease being up. So, I brought it up when I came home one night to the dishes in the sink. She was off that day, and she managed to use 2 plates, a bowl, and 3 cups. I remember this because I was so surprised by it. So, I sat on the couch next to her and told her that I wasn't going to be renewing the lease with her. She once again acted like she had no idea why I wouldn't, like this was completely out of nowhere. I began to remind her of the way she was acting and what she was doing, and, well, not doing. And she snapped again. She was screaming, calling me names, kicking and throwing stuff again, and I told her this was exactly why, and then locked myself in my bedroom again. I waited for it to get quiet and late enough before I left my room again. It was late and I hadn't made dinner, and I was hungry. After seeing that she had broken several plates and left them in the sink, I just made myself a protein shake and went back to my room. But as I started drinking it, I noticed that it tasted funny. It had this strange bitter aftertaste that didn't make sense to me. It was a strawberry powder, and I used soy milk, so I couldn't understand why it tasted that way. The only thing I could think was maybe I didn't clean my cup well enough, and there was a soap residue, so I dumped it and just went without. The next day, I made another protein shake to take with me for lunch at work, and used a different cup. When I went to drink it for lunch, I once again noticed that it tasted funny. I had just bought the soy milk, so I doubted it was bad. Not that it spoiled the same way as regular milk either, so I just couldn't explain it. And so I once again just dumped it and got something else for lunch. When I went home that night, I admittedly was not in the best mood, but it was worsened when I saw that it was still trashed after her tantrum the night before. I didn't clean it up, and I refused to do so, so I left it. I started by picking up some of the things that were knocked over in the living room, and Lexi just complained that I was blocking the TV. So I told her that she needed to grow up and start helping out around here, saying that I refused to be her mother. I went to the kitchen to start cleaning out the broken ceramic in the sink when she followed me in there. She stopped in the entryway smiling and asking me in this weird way how my shake was, following it up with a giggle like a kid who thinks they're being clever. I asked her what she meant by that and just gave me this unsettling smile and shrugged, claiming there was no reason and that she was just curious. That's when I got suspicious. I remembered both of the shakes that I tried tasting funny, so I went to grab my soy milk from the fridge. I opened it up and was shocked to see not only did it have a slight green hue to it, but it also looked lumpy, like it was curdled. How was that even possible with soy milk? Not to mention I had just bought it that week, so it wasn't expired. So I got defensive and asked her what the hell she had done to my milk. She again had that stupid grin on her face and claimed that she had no idea what I was talking about. I remember her looking so pleased with herself too, and it pissed me off. She was being childish at this point. Clearly she had done something to the milk. And what? Was it supposed to be some harmless prank? A way to get back at me for being mean to her? Or was whatever she put in there possibly dangerous? At this point, I was concerned. I didn't know what she was capable of or just how far she was willing to go. I poured it all down the sink, and from that day forward, I didn't even eat at home unless it was either takeout or something I bought at the store that day, and didn't take my eyes off of it. I even changed my doorknob to one with the lock to make sure that she didn't go in my room, whether I was home or not, clearly not being able to trust her anymore. I started avoiding her at times that I could, going straight to my room when she was home. I would wash the dishes that I used and would keep them in my room so that she couldn't break them, and all the while her stuff piled up, and the place looked worse and worse. I didn't even bother trying to do laundry in our place. I really had no reason to be there anymore, so after talking with my sister, I started moving all my stuff out at 3 months. I went down to the office and told them that I wasn't going to be renewing, but I didn't know what Lexi was going to do. They asked me about rent and the deposit, and I told them I would continue to pay rent until our lease for that year was up, and that I didn't care about the deposit. I just wanted to be done with the place. My sister didn't work. She stayed at home with my 4-year-old niece, and her husband worked, so I took a few days off of work myself to move some of my bigger items with her help, while my mom watched my niece. I planned this specifically so that we could do this while Lexi was at work, so she wouldn't be in our way either. Most of the furniture was staying. I was taking my bed and the swinging chair because my grandma had gotten that for me, as well as the living room TV, because my mom specifically bought that for me. However, I didn't need a TV in my room, so we used it in the living room. Lexi had one in her room, so I figured that was fair that we both had one at the end of the day. Other than my personal belongings, that's all I was taking. Even the couch I went half in on, I was leaving with her. Then, we ran into problems. Lexi came home, and I still have no idea how she ended up home that way, other than she took just half a day or something. At first it was awkward, as she didn't acknowledge my sister at all and just kept making these remarks under her breath every time she walked by me. But then, as we started unplugging the TV and wrapping the cables up, Lexi snapped. And she started screaming at us about how we couldn't take the TV because it was hers. I wasn't in the mood to deal with it, so I quickly corrected her and offered to show her the receipt. She stomped off into the kitchen. We got the TV into her van, then went back up to finish the smaller things in my room. I was in my bedroom with my sister standing in the doorway when, out of nowhere, I heard Lexi scream out, "That's my TV!" I looked behind my sister to see Lexi running toward us with a knife in her hand. I tried to get my sister out of the way, but I wasn't fast enough, and she drove that knife right into my sister's back. Everything slowed. My sister was screaming, and Lexi was beating her on the back of the head. I managed to get in between them, bit Lexi on the hand to get her to let go of my sister's hair, and then pushed her out of the doorway. It got her back enough that I was able to close my door and lock it, while also trying to keep my sister calm. I didn't know that she had actually stabbed her until she turned around and saw that she was stabbed in her right shoulder blade. I had her grab a towel from my bathroom to wrap around her back for the moment. Both of us were too afraid to pull the knife out. I sat against the door, being very thankful for the lock now as Lexi continued to bang against the door. My sister was on her phone calling for help. and those next few moments felt like an eternity waiting for them to show up. The rest of that day went by in a flash. We heard the sirens, we heard the police come in, Alexi was yelling at them that she would kill them too, and then we heard the popping of the taser. Once we could no longer hear her screaming, they came to my door. My sister turned out okay. The knife went deep into the muscle, but managed to miss any main nerves and arteries. My sister, of course, pressed charges, and rightfully so, and I just filed for a restraining order. I wanted nothing to do with her, and I never wanted to see her again. I told the police everything and how that wasn't who she used to be, and I still have no idea what happened to her. I don't know if she was going through something and just refused to talk to me about it, or if maybe she was using something. Or maybe I just refused to believe that was just who she was as a person to live with, and that was how she handled confrontation. I never did see Lexi again, which is good, I suppose, but I still don't know what led up to all of that, and I suppose I never will. But since then, I've lived by myself, and I refuse to let anyone move in with me. No matter how well I claim to know someone, I am not taking any chances. It's been a very interesting life so far. I'm 31. I'm just gonna wing it here and keep it short, but not leave out important details. I have around 3 stories that I'll send. I'm sending the first one your way now. I live in a small town in Upper Michigan, way out in the woods. Population of around 800, over a 30-mile radius. I used to play with my friend at this abandoned homemade baseball field that an elderly man had for many decades in his backyard, unused and overgrown. When standing at home plate, straight ahead 100 yards is woods. To the right 100 yards is woods, and to the left 200 yards down is a narrow field, then my house. This will paint the picture of the event that started everything. I was around 6 years old playing in my front yard, and I happened to look toward the abandoned baseball field, and I saw what looked to be a very tall, probably at least 10 feet if I had to guess, the memory is vivid, thing. It had black fur and resembled what we call Bigfoot. It was standing at home plate of the baseball field, and it threw a giant rock, probably a few feet wide, so very heavy, all the way into the woods straight ahead and a bit to the left my way. I could still hear the thump and the branches cracking to this day. I start to run toward it out of curiosity, and the memory then fades. Whatever it was very strong and very big. The next few years, a recurring event happened to me for at least a couple of years. I don't know how many times. It would always be dark out, very late at night. I'd be sitting in my living room on the couch, and everyone would be sleeping, and I would always find myself staring at a pitch-black window, at a pair of bright red eyes that, to this day, I cannot think about them very long, or I get shaken up. The eyes were much further apart than ours and just bigger. Time always felt like it stood still. It felt as if it was curious, and so was I. I don't recall any conversations, but I do recall feeling connected, and maybe just because we looked at each other so much that it formed a connection. This happened for a couple of years. I don't know how often, but enough for it to feel normal. I don't know if it was a friend or something curious or something else entirely. I left that house at the age of 11. To this day, I cannot comfortably look out a window at night. I don't know how I would react if I saw those eyes again. Shortly after all this, UFOs and encounters entered my life. I'll send those to you next time if you're interested, and thank you for taking the time to read this. I'm just a truth seeker, and these experiences have made me obsessed in a healthy way. This happened to me at work one night. The lobby closes at 10 p.m., and I was cleaning and getting ready for closing duties. Cleaning the prep table, cleaning the counter line, dishes, that kind of stuff. I look over at the front counter and see this man with the blanket around him, still in his hospital gown. The thing with hospital gowns is, you can't leave with them, meaning he walked out. I very cautiously walked up to the front counter. "How can I help you?" I asked, doing my best to not seem weirded out. He whispered and stuttered, and I couldn't hear him well, but I know that he asked if we had any food that we could give him. Me, being confused, asked another manager to take care of him. The other manager gave him a nacho fry for free, and he sat in the lobby eating and writing. He gave her a note with his name saying that she was, and I quote, "the best faux show, faux shizzle." Seems kind of cute, right? Well, a few hours later, as we were closing, he was outside just sitting by our front door smoking a cigarette. 30 minutes before we closed, he was apparently walking around the building and talking to the customers that were pulling in. Once we closed, we locked the window and he came up to the window and then asked for a drink. So we gave him a Baja Blast. Then he went back to the front door. He then came back around to the window and started to bang on said window, and we asked what he wanted, and he replied saying that he wanted a job. You don't ask for a job at 1:30 in the morning, after the business is closed. He then started laughing. I looked around at my other coworkers. The guys on shift, gone, hiding, not doing jack squat. Me and my two other girl coworkers were the only ones talking to this dude. I went back to the office and called the non-emergency line because what the actual hell? The police got there and talked to him. They asked us if we just wanted him to leave, to which I said yes. The officer said that he was just looking for a job, laughed, and walked away. The next day, one of my coworkers saw him wandering around a gas station talking to a police officer, and he got escorted away. I do wonder if he's doing okay, but yeah. To the man that was laughing at us at the drive-thru, let's not meet again. I want to begin this story with a warning. This does mention depression and suicidal thoughts, so if that's not something you can listen to, I understand. But I want to warn others first. I wanted to share my story as a way to hopefully help others out of that dark mindset, and also help them identify some warning signs that you might see in yourself or a friend. I wanted to share my story as a way to hopefully help others out of that dark mindset, and also help them identify some warning signs that you might see in yourself or a friend. I will say that this was several years ago, and I'm doing a lot better, and I don't have those same thoughts either. I have a therapist that I see regularly too, and she helps me on my worst days, but before then, I was not in a good place. I'd been struggling with depression for some time, but didn't know what to really do about it. I didn't have the best insurance, and it's not something we really talked about in my family. It's not to say they didn't care. My mom meant a lot to me, and I knew that she did care, but it's just hard to explain unless you've been in that darkness. Anyway, I did my best, carrying on in life. At the time of this event, I was in a relationship too, but it was already rocky. He was emotionally abusive and had cheated on me before, but I wasn't strong enough and didn't have enough self-worth to kick him to the curb. So, some days were really good, and others just made me want to hide in a corner alone. But my work was the one stable thing in my life, and I was good at it. I could go in, put in my earbuds, block out the rest of the world, and just dive into my assignments. It kept my mind busy, and I loved it. But then we had a new hire named Chloe. She was hired as a junior associate, and since I had seniority in the department, I was asked to train her. From day one, she was incredibly charming. She was funny, bubbly, engaging, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know everyone. I helped introduce her to the rest of the team, and she quickly seemed to click with everybody. She even asked thoughtful questions about our projects and seemed eager to learn. Maybe she really liked this field, or maybe it was just the eagerness of starting a new job, but either way, her positivity was a breath of fresh air for me, and it reeled me in. We clicked immediately. She was fun to talk to and had this way of making me feel like the most important person in the room. We started getting lunch together, went out for drinks together, something I never did. We even went to the movies a few times. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a real friend. Someone who actually wanted to spend time with me and helped me get out of my head. What I didn't realize at the time was how vulnerable I was. She would ask probing questions about me and my life, about my relationship, my family, my past. I thought she was being a good friend and showing interest in my life. Instead, it was like she was gathering ammunition. The manipulation started subtly, and with my mindset, I didn't recognize it for what it was. She would make comments about my appearance, like telling me I should wear more muted colors, claiming that they would make me look more mature and professional. She would take me shopping and help me pick out these long skirts and dresses that were plain cream, brown, or white. Before I knew it, I was wearing the clothes that she picked out for me. It styled my hair the way she suggested, and even tried wearing subtle makeup. I wasn't a makeup person before, but she had me wearing a nude lipstick and mascara, and to be honest, it did make me feel a little better. She even started inserting herself and her suggestions into my work. She had this way of building me up and tearing me down in the same conversation. She'd say things like, "You have great ideas, but your presentation and lack of selling yourself holds you back." Then she'd convince me to be more assertive at work, but it always seemed to benefit her projects. She would encourage me to challenge our boss on certain decisions and processes, and then position herself as the reasonable alternative to make it work. I would get a reaction from my boss, typically one of surprise, maybe even impressed, so I thought that it was a good thing. But the worst part of her manipulation came when she exploited my depression. She was one of the few people I felt like I could talk to about it. When I'd have bad days, she would listen sympathetically, but she would also subtly reinforce those negative thoughts. If I said I felt worthless, instead of challenging that and giving me reasons for the contrary, she would ask me what was making me feel that way, and just listen to me name off all the reasons, not once stopping to disagree or give me a genuine comfort or perspective. She'd basically just validate my darkest thoughts about myself. She started isolating me from other coworkers too, but I didn't realize it at the time. She would make comments about how certain coworkers felt uncomfortable around me, and mention how this person didn't acknowledge your contribution in the team meeting. It started to get me thinking that maybe I wasn't as good as I thought I was at work. But while I was pulling back, Chloe would be getting more recognition for projects we worked on together, and even provide feedback and ideas that I once told her about, telling me that she was speaking up for me. She was so supportive to my face that I had just convinced myself that she truly had my best interests at heart. Then there was the relationship with my boyfriend. I learned that he had been cheating again, or maybe still, and was just caught again. and we of course had a huge argument about it. He told me that it was my fault, and for once in my life, I took initiative and told him that I couldn't do this anymore. He packed up a few things he had at my place and left, saying some pretty hurtful last words to me. After he was gone, I called Chloe so I wouldn't be alone, and she was quick to come over. However, I was hoping to be comforted and to be helped to forget about my now ex, but that's not what happened. She practically agreed with him, once again in a subtle way. She pointed out that I had been pretty stressed lately and probably distant, not to mention depressed, and that probably pushed him away. So, that night, already feeling pretty damn low, I confessed something to her that I hadn't told anyone. I told her that I considered ending my own life. Nothing seemed worth fighting anymore. I expected what any friend would do, be shocked, tell me to seek help, and that there were plenty of reasons to live. Instead, she got quiet and asked me to tell her more about that feeling. What followed next was the most chilling conversation of my life. But the scariest part was that I didn't recognize it at the time. Chloe never tried to talk me out of these thoughts. Instead, she helped me to explore them. She asked me some probing questions, but I'll not put them here. I don't want anyone who has similar thoughts to even consider them. But just know that they were not questions you ask someone who's in a dark place like I was. So she asked those questions. She even made me make a list of pros and cons of continuing to live. She would nod sympathetically as I listed all the reasons people would be better off without me, but when I struggled to find items for the reasons to live, she would just sit quietly, never once giving me any reason. Not a single one. Over the next few weeks, these conversations became regular occurrences. Chloe would check in on me daily, always steering our talks back to my darkest thoughts. But what I wasn't expecting was her to start helping me plan it. She would send me links about different methods and discuss them with me. She even made a comment about making sure it works the first time. You can see where this is all going, and what she meant by that. So that's what happened. She tried to help me plan everything. She even offered to take care of some of my affairs after I was gone. The night that I planned to go through with it, I texted her one final time, letting her know what I was doing. I texted a few other people like my mom and my sister that I loved them, and while they all responded with the same thing, asking if I was okay, Chloe responded with the hug emoji and said that I was so brave. I won't tell you what I had planned, but I was sitting on the bathroom floor with the door closed, crying, when out of nowhere I saw a paw under the door. My cat, Ollie, was pawing at the gap under the door, making this very specific little mew he does when something is wrong. It's the same sound he makes when he finds a bug or when I'm crying or yelling because of a fight with my ex. Something told me to let him in, and I did. When I did, he immediately jumped onto my lap, purring intensely, and refused to leave. I tried to let him stay and keep the door open, but he would not leave my lap, and was constantly nuzzling my chin and hands. And, in that moment, sitting on my bathroom floor, something shifted in me. I've had Ollie since I was young. He was my first and only pet that I got on my own, and he'd always been with me. I couldn't imagine leaving him with anyone else. No one knows your pets and their personalities like you do. So, I broke down again in a completely different way, telling myself that I had to get better for both of us. I took a shower after that, and I texted my mom asking her to take care of Ollie for me. I didn't have the heart to tell her what was going on, so I left a note telling her where I was going, and I went to the hospital. For the next few weeks, I had no contact with the outside world. My mom had to come pick up my car and belongings, like my phone, and I just went through the motions of therapy, medication adjustments, and testing to see what worked best for me. and slowly we went through the process of rebuilding my will to live. When I finally was released, my mom picked me up and she hugged me tighter than she had in a while. She took me home, and Ollie and I smothered each other in love for a few moments, both of us happy to be together again. That is when my mom and I had a long and very serious conversation. She apologized and explained how she had no idea how bad it was for me and wished that I had told her sooner. She explained that I was never a burden to them, and that she and my sister both felt just as guilty that they weren't there for me. But she also admitted to going through my phone trying to get the information for my work to let them know. And that's when she saw my conversations with Chloe and asked about her. That's when my eyes really opened to what she was doing. My mom said that the things that she said to me were very manipulative and dangerous. And she made me promise that I would not associate with her anymore. And with how much clearer I was thinking and seeing, I understood, and she was absolutely right. What kind of person calls you a friend but then tries to help you end your own life? When it came time for me to return to work, I spoke with my therapist on ways to stay in a healthy mindset since I would be working with Chloe, and I held on to that. I went into work and was once again surprised with how incredibly supportive and relieved my boss and coworkers were with me being there and being okay. I had a long talk with my boss, and he explained how he thought something was wrong because of all the great ideas I would come up with at work, but would then push them off or suggest Chloe to do them. He fully expected me to take charge of these projects, but was concerned when she was always involved. And, at the time, I once again didn't see this as someone stealing my work and recognition. I spoke to a coworker that I was close to, and she explained how Chloe had come in the next day and told everyone that I was dead, which confused my boss because my mom had also contacted him that same morning about me being in the hospital and didn't know what happened. I don't know if he told my mom or not, but maybe that's what prompted her to look through my conversations with her. I was feeling the love from every direction, and it really helped lift me up that much more. I was feeling good. I was feeling confident. But I was still the person I was, and part of me said that I should at least let Chloe know that I was alive and that I was better. I think that was the part of me that craved that loyalty and that connection. I went to her little office and saw her busy staring at her computer. I knocked on the door, and she just looked up at me and said, "Oh, hi." I stood by the door and told her that I just wanted to let her know that I was doing better, and was about to thank her for being there for me, even though I know she really wasn't, and she just gave a thin smile and said, "Okay." It was the only weird interaction I had gotten since I got back, and I was confused. I thought that maybe she might be happy to see me again, so I pried. I asked her if there was something wrong, and she quite bluntly said, "I thought you promised you were going to do it. I spent all that time helping you plan it, listened to you bitch and complain, and then you just didn't?" I was in complete shock. She was upset because I didn't follow through with my plans that night. Who says that to someone? Someone you claim to be your friend. But that's when I truly realized that my mom and my therapist were right. She was toxic. She was dangerous, and dare I even say, she was evil. She didn't care about me at all. I don't know what her end results were. Like, did she just want my position? Or just the power of knowing that she helped someone do something like that? So, I avoided her completely after that. I continued to shine at work, not speaking to her or sharing any of my ideas with her. My relationship with my mom grew so much stronger, and my toxic outings with Chloe turned into loving, thoughtful lunches with people that really mattered to me, and vice versa. I got out of that dark place, and I do think that my cat Ollie had a lot to do with that. After a few months, Chloe actually quit. More so, she raided and stole a bunch of supplies from all of our cabinets. No call, no showed for about a week, so We just assumed that she was gone, and I couldn't have been happier for that. I'm incredibly thankful that I got a second chance. And because I have a clearer head, I can better recognize these toxic and manipulative traits. It was hard at first, but it is something you can get through. So, if anyone ever tells you that it's not worth it, or tries to help you end it, please, don't listen to them. It'll always be worth it. I promise, and Ollie promises. This happened over 20 years ago, and I'm happy to say that I've become smarter and more sensible with age, but back then, in my early 20s, I have to admit that I was rather naive. Also, trigger warnings for SH, so not sure you'll even want to read this one on the air, but I'll submit it for me. I've never written this down before, so I think it can be a healing experience for myself. I'm a female, and I went to uni for electronics engineering, a heavily male-dominated field, as you can imagine, especially back then. I was the only woman among about 100 first-year students. And this happened when I was working on my thesis dissertation, and I also worked part-time as a support engineer for a computer brand. Communication back then happened a lot via email. One day, I received an email from an unknown address, something like person1@aol.com. Obviously, not that address, but just to give you an idea. A generic email address. In the email, they said, and I'm paraphrasing as I didn't keep it, "I'm writing because I saw your ad that you offer your services as an escort, and wanted to know what your rate would be to go on a weekend trip with me." To say that I was livid is an understatement. I was scared and for some reason ashamed. I couldn't even figure out if this was someone pretending to have seen an ad just to mess with me, or maybe someone had actually created an ad pretending to be me. As I write this, I can feel myself about to disassociate, so I'm having to take breaks. I hope it doesn't take me ages to finish. To be honest, I don't remember if I replied or not, but the next day I got another message from the same account, saying something like, "I saw you walking down X street. I like how you looked in that blue shirt," or something to that effect. Now, that was super scary. To know that unbeknownst to me, I was being watched. I felt so vulnerable. At the time, I lived with a male roommate, but we barely ever saw each other. We used to joke that it was the best of both worlds, since the cost was cheaper than living alone, but the experience was like having your own place. But in the back of my mind, it made me feel a little safer knowing that my friend was in the next room. I kept receiving a couple more emails, and I must have replied, but I don't remember if I did. What I do remember is that I know that this had to be someone that I knew. Not a complete stranger. It felt personal. I don't know why, but I had the thought to try to hack the account to see who this was. To see if I could find more information about the owner of this email address. Now, I'm not a hacker, but I started trying to log into the email account the old-fashioned way. And for the password, again, I don't know why, I started using variations of my own name. And it actually worked. I must have tried more than 10 different versions, as I imagine at some point it should have blocked it for safety, right? But I got in. It was surreal that it worked. To the point that I questioned if I had multiple personalities and was doing this to myself, but why? And I had no history of mental illness or anything like that. But on the other hand, how could I have guessed the password? And it was a variation of my name. Anyway, there was no relevant information that gave me any clues about who this stalker could have been. The account was very new, and besides sending me those emails, it had only been used to sign up for porn sites. And so, I changed the password so the person couldn't use it again to harass me, and tried to move on. but I was still worried that there was potentially an ad out there where, quote, I was offering escort services, or something like that. And to make it worse, I couldn't completely discount the scenario where this was me doing it in some sort of disassociative episode. Now, to understand what had really happened and how I was able to figure this out, we need to go back a few months. About 6 months before I'd been looking for a topic to make my dissertation on, one day I ran into a guy that had studied the same as me, but he was 2 years ahead. He was already working at one of the major telecommunication companies here in my country and was also a professor teaching electronics in another university. So, he proposed a topic that I could develop for my dissertation, and that I would be paid for, and he also offered that I come give a talk to his students. Also, a paid gig. It was a great opportunity, and I trust him because we both had been active participants in the student branch of our professional association. Keep in mind, this happened back in the mid-90s, so meetings and lectures were in person back then. We set a date for my lecture to the students, and we were going to have a meeting to discuss the dissertation project after that. And this was going to happen in the town where I lived. I was going to take the bus to get there. He was going to pick me up. And because by the time we would finish it, it would have been too late to take the bus back to my town, I was, or so I thought, going to spend the night in his guest room in his house, where he lived with his wife and Labrador puppy. The day of, he picked me up at the bus station and we drove to the university where I gave my lecture. Then I assumed that we would drive to his house, where I would meet his wife and we would have our meeting, and then spend the night. Right? Well, he had other plans. We got in his truck and he told me that he had booked a cabin for me so I would be more comfortable. I don't know if I was too naive or if I trusted him too much, but I didn't see it as a red flag as I should have. And we got there and he ordered something to eat so we could have our meeting while we ate. He was not very eager to jump into the technical aspects of the meeting, and I was tired and wanted to get it done so that I could go to bed. He half-assed the answers to all my technical questions and kept dragging it. I still hadn't put two and two together, so I jokingly said, "It's getting late. Your wife's not going to be happy that you're out so late. She's going to make you sleep with the pup." That's when I realized he never had the intention to leave. It was a lodge in the countryside, and there was no phone signal. I tried not to freak out and was constantly telling myself that this was normal, and to not make it a big deal. This is what trauma does to you. You learn not to trust your own gut. The cabin had 2 twin beds, so at least we were not going to have to share a bed. But as much as I knew this guy and up until that day had trusted him, as much as you can trust who you think is a normal person, I was not comfortable having to share a room. The cabins in this lodge were very far apart. It was already close to midnight, and I didn't have a working phone. So I went into survival mode, and I guess what people call fawning now, which is when you try to befriend and appease the person perceived as a threat. So I went to the bathroom, put my PJs on, and got in bed. He went after, and I heard him take a shower. I wasn't liking it, but I tried to reassure myself that some people like to do that, even if the context it definitely felt inappropriate. I pulled the blankets up as far as I could, and he came out of the bathroom with just a towel wrapped around his waist. I feel so bad for that version of me now typing this up. If this happened today, I would be so much more assertive, and this would not have gone this far. He sat next to where my feet were, and put his hand underneath the blankets and started rubbing my feet. I froze. He did it while he was talking normally. I don't remember what about, but it was weird to have like 2 completely different interactions going on at the same time. I don't know how to explain it. I was able to snap out of that frozen state, and I told him to stop. that I wasn't comfortable, and he tried to insist that I needed to relax. But I stayed firm, and said that I just wanted to sleep and get up early so he could drive me to the bus station first thing in the morning. He turned off the lights, and then got into the other bed. I didn't look. I didn't want to sleep, and I set the intention to stay awake throughout the night. But I was taking some medications that made me sleepy and had taken it before I realized his intentions, during dinner. I fought it as long as I could, but at some point I must have fallen asleep. All I know is that in the middle of the night, I must have felt something weird on my back while laying on my side. It woke me up, and as I rolled back, I saw a figure crawling away. I faked that I was still asleep, but waited until the first rays of the sun came out. I got up, got dressed in the bathroom, and waited outside by his truck. I barely spoke to him until he dropped me off at the station, where I got in the bus and never spoke to him again. Or so I thought. I didn't tell anyone about it. I guess I was traumatized. You can make the point that nothing really happened and that it could have been so much worse, but still, I felt so stupid and ashamed. But back to the emails. I shared about them with my boyfriend and a friend. I couldn't think of who would do such a thing to me until I remembered. The cabin guy. But as messed up as the whole ordeal was, I couldn't imagine him, a normal guy with a job, a wife, and a dog, wasting time harassing me. And for what? But it was the only lead I had. So, I went into detective mode. Because if the alternative was that I had somehow a split personality that was tormenting me, I would just rather him be the creep. Remember I mentioned that he worked for a telecommunications company? I compared the IP addresses that the email he had sent me from his work email and went through the ones that the harassing emails went through. And they matched. I knew that those emails had been sent from the employee network of that company. He was the only person I knew that worked there. With this, I went to the police with very little expectations of what would come of it. I told them everything. And that I didn't have proof, but that I highly suspected this person to be the one harassing me. About a week later, I found a card had been slipped under my door by the police, saying that they wanted to talk to me. They'd come while I was at work, so I was planning to go as soon as I could within a few days. But, a couple of days later, I came home to find a letter from the creepo himself had been slipped under my door. I was livid, because I didn't remember him knowing where I lived. I didn't want to think what would have happened had I been there and opened the door. Turns out, the police had actually given him my address. I was beyond angry. And in the letter, he admitted to everything, saying that it was all a prank, that I'd blown things out of proportion. And get this, that I was ruining his marriage. I guess he had some explaining to do when the police came to his house looking for him. At this point, a friend of mine who is a lawyer helped me get a restraining order. He got the creep to pay the fees, as I didn't have the means to pay him at the time. A part of me wanted revenge and for everyone to know what kind of creep this guy was, but I also had too much shame to make it more public. It's taken time and therapy to heal from it. I'm glad I wasn't crazy, but I wish this never happened. Things have changed a lot for women in the past couple decades, but this type of thing still happens, especially in male-dominated fields. I hope we get better at supporting girls and women, and give them a space to speak up and be believed. And to this guy, I hope our paths never cross again. Cassandra Ramirez's story. This is one of those stories that really resonates with me due to some of the details that serve as something of a backdrop to this incredibly tragic story. I'll give a bit of a trigger warning, as some details of this case will possibly be upsetting to some listeners. Cassandra Brianna Ramirez was born March 15, 1993. While a lot of details about her early life are difficult to find, such as where she was born, the details we do have provide enough of a picture that it can be said that she was really invested in turning her life around from the path that she had started to head down. It can be really difficult when telling these kinds of stories to figure out just where to begin. However, in cases like Cassandra's, due to the lack of certain details, sometimes that choice is made for you. In this case, we'll begin with the birth of Cassandra's first child, a son, in November of 2010 when Cassandra was only 17 years old. Jaden Isaiah was born prematurely and would tragically pass only 12 days after his birth, and this event would serve as a catalyst for Cassandra to fall into a pattern of substance abuse in order to try and cope. As a tribute to her firstborn son, Cassandra got a tattoo with his name and dates of birth and passing. 2 years later, in 2012, she would give birth to her son Ethan, whom she would lose custody of. Ethan currently resides with his paternal grandmother. During the intervening years, and while struggling with both her substance abuse and homelessness, Cassandra was trying to put her life to right, and completed culinary school, and was aspiring to become a chef. Despite the positive strides she took, Cassandra still had a good many of those little hurdles that do love to spring up and take us all by surprise, when she was assaulted by her ex-boyfriend's current girlfriend in July of 2017, and ended up being stabbed by her. While the assailant was charged in this case, so too was Cassandra, although those charges were later dropped. Things were not bound to get any easier for her either, as a year later, Cassandra would be attacked again. This time it was by a family friend, and the attack was of the most heinous kind. The assault took place in an apartment in the Bronx, and in the aftermath, she called her mother, Ingrid, in tears, saying that she didn't know what to do. Ultimately, she pursued charges against the individual, and this entire situation kind of marks the run-up to her ultimate disappearance in 2018. She had very conflicted feelings going forward, afraid of what people were going to be saying about her. Her aunt, specifically, said that she was very nervous when she spoke about having to testify before a grand jury in the case. As you can imagine, this took a toll on Cassandra. While she had never outright said that she was scared, Cassandra did voice that she was going to have to be careful now. And, oh, just how eerily prophetic those words would prove to be. You see, just 1 week after this, Cassandra would disappear. Her aunt was one of the last people to speak to Cassandra the night that she went missing. The young woman was out with one of her exes that she'd had a kind of on and off again relationship with. During the call, Cassandra told her aunt that they had stopped for gas, and that they were then heading to Long Island. The guy in question, by all accounts, is said to have had a very unhealthy and downright toxic relationship with Cassandra. Ingrid says that the first time she met the man, he said, "I just love your daughter so much, but she pisses me off just all the time." And that was apparently just the first in a series of not red, but crimson flags. Every one of Cassandra's friends and family members that met this unnamed guy said they all knew something about him was off the moment that they met him. And on the night in question, Cassandra was in touch with her aunt periodically, checking in and letting her know that she was safe. So it would seem that even Cassandra herself felt the need to let someone know that she was safe as the night progressed. Cassandra was due to begin working at a new job the next morning, and had been emphasizing to everyone that she was going to be going to bed early and getting up early. The next day, however, was when the horror would begin for Cassandra's family. After she not only failed to get in touch with any of her family, but was also strangely absent from her social media, her family immediately knew that something was terribly wrong. Unfortunately, this is also the point in the story where we have to begin dealing with speculation and theory, since we have no way of knowing just what exactly happened to Cassandra overnight. But this is also where it kind of gets interesting. As a New York reporter was given access to Cassandra's call log, and she went through calling some of the more frequently dialed numbers. She got in touch with a few people that acted very sketched out when she started asking questions. This really interesting bit is that when she called the ex that Cassandra had been with the night she vanished, the guy that answered was most certainly not the guy that she was trying to reach. The man said he'd had the number for about 3 years, which would fit the timeline when Cassandra disappeared. It would also mean that not long after her disappearance, the ex in question had dumped his old phone number. The person that has it now said that when he first got the number, he received a lot of texts from people asking about bars, which is slang term for Xanax. So, while Cassandra might have cleaned up her own act, it would seem that some of the people she associated with were still involved in the seedy underbelly of society, and in that world of drugs. It's really tragic that a young woman that was rising above the challenges life had thrown at her, and preparing a better life for herself and her son, would so suddenly and completely vanish, especially after she had endured all of this within her life. And if you know anything about Cassandra, please contact the New York Police Department Missing Persons Squad. Contact info below. I listen to you most nights, and have had a few ghost experiences over the years. This is one of them. I hadn't lived in Newcastle for years, but the memory that haunts me the most comes from my teens back in the mid-'80s. I was about 14 then, running with the street kid named Bo. He was 16, rough around the edges, but he had this way of lighting up a room with a grin. Later on, the Newcastle Herald would dub him the king of the street kids, but to me, he was just Bo, my mate. We were inseparable. Weekends, I would ride the train from Shortland to Wickham just to meet him. Sometimes he'd be at the Pink Elephant markets, slipping things into his pockets like it was a game. Other times he would show up at my house, and my mum, never knowing he was homeless, would pile food on his plate, smiling as if feeding him might fix everything. We roamed the cemeteries, alleys, train stations. We were kids chasing mischief. But beneath it all, Bo carried a heaviness that I couldn't name back then. He would vanish for days at a time. I'd search the streets for him until my feet blistered. I hated those silences more than anything. One night, after hours of looking, I sat alone on the Wickham train platform, exhausted and close to tears. Bo crept up behind me, laughing as I jumped out of my skin. I was furious and relieved all at once. He was tipsy but alive. That was Bo, always testing me, always slipping back into my life when I thought I had lost him. But then came the silence that didn't break. A week, 2 weeks, nothing. I wasted away with worry, dragging myself through school, my stomach knotted with hunger and grief. And then, one Saturday night, I found myself wandering Hunter Street, past the shuttered Pink Elephant markets, over the bridge, towards Islington. The Wickham pub roared with drunken voices, so I slipped onto the quiet park beside it. The moon was full, the night was alive with trains, crickets, the distant rev of cars. I sat on a bench, breathing, just listening. For the first time in weeks, I felt almost safe. Then I heard a sound beside me, and a shadow sat on the bench. Pete? The voice was his. I'm sorry. So sorry. My throat locked up. Bo? I messed up and I couldn't find you, Pete. Tears burned down my face. Where have you been? What do you mean? Silence. I turned and he was gone. The bench was empty. The night sounds rushed back in, the clatter of trains, the jeers of drunkards from the pub. My calls for him were swallowed by their laughter. A week later, I was at school waiting for the principal when I noticed a newspaper lying on the chair beside me. I never cared for the news, but the photo froze me. Bo crouched low, dressed in black, graffiti behind him. The headline said that he had hung himself in that same park, opposite the Wickham pub, weeks earlier. But I had seen him. I'd spoken to him. To this day, I believe that Wickham Park is haunted. Not by strangers, nor shadows, but by Bo himself, still searching and lingering. And one day, I will find him again. Back in the summer of 2022, I was taking a road trip to see my family and some friends back home in Kansas City. The 2 years prior to 22 were a bit of a mess, as many of us know, and I was unable to go home like I usually did for the holidays. But since I couldn't do much other than school and work, I had saved up some money, and I thought I would spend the summer back home. I was going to be driving from Denver by myself, staying with my buddy Marcus, and surprising my parents when I got there. So he got all the updates along the way. Now, I had made this drive a few times, so I had a slight idea of where I was, but that's about it. I have a notoriously bad sense of direction, so I would not be able to make the drive without GPS, but that's what my phone was for. I headed out after I got off work, which was about 5 p.m., and texted Marcus telling him I was on my way. I knew it was going to be late by the time I got in, but that was okay because I was only going to want to crash when I got there anyways. The drive for most of it went fine. I stopped a few times to grab something to eat and use the restroom, but otherwise, I was fine. That was until I was on the Kansas side. I think it was somewhere between Salina and Topeka when my phone froze. I had gotten a text and started responding when it just froze on the message. Nothing I did was working, so I was out my GPS. I had an exit that I was going to have to take soon, per what I remembered the GPS saying, but I couldn't remember the name or how long until I had to take it. So, a bit of panic set in. I just kept driving for a while, thinking I would just take the next exit and try to restart my phone. But what I didn't realize was that I must have been in a spot that didn't have an exit for quite some time. I managed to restart my phone and then did take the next exit that I saw, which put me in this little city that I had never heard of. It started with a B, I think. I pulled into an old gas station, and the only reason I knew it was actually still in service was because of the old man sitting on a bench outside the store, reading a magazine. The lights inside were even off or dimmed. It was strange, to say the least. He looked up at me, and we both nodded when we made eye contact, and then I looked back down at my phone to get maps pulled back up. The man then stood up, walked inside, and turned on the lights. I wasn't planning on stopping, but now that he had gotten up, I kind of felt obligated to. I guess that way I didn't look like I was going to rob the place either. I started plugging back in my destination, and was confused when the time didn't add up. I was about at the same time that I was when my phone had locked up. It also had me turning back around, so had I gone too far somehow? I didn't recall missing any other exits either. I figured maybe this would be a good reason to step inside the store and ask the man that worked there. I went in and grabbed a soda, and as he rang me up, he asked me where I was headed. As I explained to him where I was going and what happened, I remember the look of confusion and maybe even amusement on his face. He said that I was like 45 miles southwest of Topeka. Turns out, I hadn't just missed an exit, I had somehow gotten completely off I-70 and had been following some smaller highway for over an hour without even realizing it. We both had a small laugh. I think he was enjoying this more, though, and he teased that this was exactly why phones/GPSs are not always reliable in small places like that. He tried his best explaining how to get back to I-70, and I thanked him, and then was on my way. I'm sure that his directions were accurate, but again, being directionally challenged, I went back to my phone GPS and just hoped that it wouldn't freeze up again. I texted my friend telling him that I had something holding me up, not wanting to admit that it was my fault just yet, and that I was back on the road. Back on the road and back on I-70, there were suddenly orange cones everywhere, and cops directing traffic off the highway. It was a complete detour, routing everyone through some back roads to get around whatever was going on, and then back on the highway at an entrance ramp further down. Weird, and a minor inconvenience, but at least I could follow the other cars in front of me, and my GPS was still going. While I was driving, Marcus called me and he sounded a bit concerned as he asked me if I was good. I laughed and told him yeah, and explained how I just had some phone issues that delayed me. I asked why, and he said that it was nothing and that he would see me when I got there. It was a bit weird of him to just call, but I shrugged it off and continued my drive. Finally, I got to Marcus's place with no other issues, and he greeted me at the door like we used to do. After I was in and he showed me where I would be staying, we sat and talked for a bit. That is when he dropped it on me. He asked if I had any troubles on the road getting here, other than my getting lost snafu, and even asked if I saw any accidents. I told him no, but that there were several cop cars on part of the highway, routing people off the exit. And that's when he looked at me all wide-eyed and said, "Bro, you dodged a big bullet." He explained that there had been a massive collision on that same highway. There were a few cars and a semi involved, and 3 people were dead. He said that since he was up waiting for me, he had been notified of some breaking news that mentioned it. That's why he called me. He knew I had been on that highway, and since I mentioned being held up, he was concerned that I may have been involved. But get this. The time of that accident was close to the time that I had texted him about being delayed. Which meant that if my phone hadn't frozen, and if I hadn't missed my exit, I very well could have been involved in that accident. And worst of all, I could have died. Instead, that damn phone issue could have saved my life. I was there for the aftermath, was routed around it, and that now all made sense. They had all the lanes blocked for most of the night. We both sat there in that moment of panic and surrealism and then tried to brush it off and move on. It was a little hard to sleep that night with all the adrenaline, but I was okay. I surprised my parents the next day and decided against mentioning the accident, hoping they wouldn't put 2 and 2 together either. But it did make me stop and think about it more. My parents didn't even know that I was coming, so they could have gotten news that their youngest son died trying to come home. That kind of made me feel worse, to be honest. Overall, my trip there turned out great, and it did make me appreciate things a little more. Even the unexpected ones, like a phone freezing up. On my way home, I was a little more aware of my surroundings. I paid close attention to any cars around me, and semis made me nervous as hell. I made it back home safely and let everyone know how I was doing any time that I stopped. But I also felt the weird guilt about being relieved. 3 people did die. And here I am, grateful that I took a wrong turn. It's a weird feeling, to be honest. I mean, that whole thing made me rethink about getting lost. Maybe all those wrong turns or delays or even little mishaps weren't just mistakes or inconveniences. Maybe they were to keep us safe and to avoid potentially dangerous situations. I just try to appreciate what I have now and tell myself that it's all happening in this exact order for a reason. So, in September of 2014, my best friend Laurie was given tickets to see the Black Keys at Barclays Center in Brooklyn. She invited me to come with her, which, of course, I jumped on. Free Black Keys show? Count me in. But on the way to the venue, we experienced an incident that kind of set the tone for the rest of the night. Laurie and I were on the subway in a two-seat booth facing the back, minding our own business, and cracking each other up over nothing, as usual. Suddenly, a very tall, seemingly very drugged-out man pops out in front of us from nowhere and gets in our faces. "Why are you laughing at me? You lesbians? I'll effing kill you." He was so close and yelling so loud that his spit hit my face. We just stared at him, stunned, and stood up from our seats to be in a less vulnerable position. The next stop, which was not ours, was approaching, and we silently made an agreement to run off then. We both remember specifically looking down the rest of the train and just being stared at, mouths wide open, by the other train passengers. Many able-bodied men who didn't even pretend to come to our aid. We got off the train and had to wait for another one, which ended up making us late for the show. We were pretty shaken up. Then, when we got to Barclays Center, we quickly learned why she had been gifted these tickets. We were in the actual last possible row of the nosebleeds. We're talking rafter views. Dan and Patrick looked like ants. And standing up, it was so steep that you'd best keep your balance or fall face first into the sea of everyone else in attendance below. Getting a drink or bathroom break was like risking your life. So, yeah, that whole evening went downhill pretty fast. But we reminisce and share the story all the time, which is pretty hilarious now, years later. What are friends? People that we trust. People we let our guard down around and try to just enjoy being ourselves with. People we have so much in common with that we often feel like kindred spirits or even sometimes like long-lost siblings or relatives. It's a powerful connection, to be sure, even intimate in its own way. For most people, when we are with our friends, our trusted inner circle, if you will, we feel completely safe, knowing that, should the worst happen, they would have our back, and you theirs. At least that's how it should be, and even is, for most of us. It's not always the case, though. Sometimes, within our closest and most trusted friends, there lurks something dark. Something festering just beneath the surface that we don't see until it's far too late. Such as, tragically, in the case of Peyton Isabel Leutner. And this was back in the summer of 2014. For Peyton, the events of one May day would change absolutely everything. Having gone to her best friend Morgan Geyser's birthday/slumber party, the 12-year-old was enjoying quality time with her longtime friend, and another mutual friend, Anissa Weir. Things would take an incredibly sinister turn that day after the sleepover, when under the guise of playing hide-and-seek, Morgan and Anissa lured Peyton first to a nearby park, and from there into the woods, Peyton could not have had any idea what was about to transpire, or that her best friends were about to commit a betrayal so foul that it would make anyone hearing the story begin to doubt possible motives of their own friends. You see, Morgan and Anissa had been planning something terrible. And this, the day after Morgan's 12th birthday, was the day they were going to enact it. After convincing Peyton to lie down and covering her with leaves and sticks, Anissa handed Morgan a knife and told her, "Do it now. Go ballistic. Go crazy. Make sure she's down." Words Peyton still remembers hearing. And then her friend Morgan said, "Don't be afraid, I'm only a little kitty cat." Then she pounced on Peyton and began stabbing her repeatedly. As Peyton lay there on the ground bleeding out, she managed to say, "I trusted you." Anissa and Morgan then told Peyton that if she just laid there, then she would lose blood slower, so she should just lay there while they went to fetch some help for her. At which point, the two conspirators fled, leaving Peyton to die alone in the forest. Eventually, Peyton was able to pull herself to her feet with the aid of some nearby trees. She then began to painfully make her way back towards the park that they had come from, which is incredibly brave. And it tells you just how much strength there was in that 12-year-old girl that had just been betrayed in the most profound way possible by at least one person whom she genuinely trusted and cared for. I phrase it that way because while Peyton did consider Morgan as her best friend, she didn't really like Anissa, and she didn't really feel like she was ever her friend, saying that Anissa was always cruel to her. And she also said that she felt very much like Anissa was jealous of her relationship with Morgan, maybe because they had already been friends for years by the time Anissa met them and joined their group. As Peyton trudged her way through the woods, desperately trying to find someone to help her, a cyclist found her and called EMTs. All told, Peyton had been stabbed 19 times. One of the wounds missed a major artery of her heart by a millimeter. Another went through her diaphragm and punctured her liver and stomach. It took 6 hours of operations to save her, with the surgeons saying if the knife had gone the width of a human hair further, she would not have lived. During a 2019 interview, Peyton has said that she suffers lingering trauma, understandably so, from the attack, and that she sleeps with a pair of broken scissors in fear of ever being attacked again. But it gets darker. This is where we really start getting into the truly terrifying part of this case. The attack, while horrific, is less terrifying than the actual motive behind it. I think it goes without saying that all of us here have a love of horror and the creepy, both real and fictional. But when you take young people, be they male or female, let's just be clear, that feel outcast and marginalized, coupled with a hidden and untreated mental illness, it's a recipe for disaster. Morgan Geyser is, unfortunately, an embodiment of what can happen, and what a person can become when these elements combine. Young Morgan was always an outsider, from her earliest days in school. Peyton initially became friends with her because she felt bad seeing that Morgan had no other friends at all. That's how their bond was formed, and the two became best friends. But Morgan was a girl with secrets. And once Anissa came along, another troubled young girl with social and mental health issues, the pair fell into what can only be called a shared delusion. Morgan suffered from early onset schizophrenia, and had fallen into a delusion that fictional characters were in fact her friends. In her state, she was convinced that she knew these characters and had a personal relationship with them. One of these characters included the creepypasta character known as Slenderman, or Slender, as the girls referred to him. Anissa was just as caught up in this fantasy as Morgan was, and the pair kind of fueled each other's delusional states and continually escalated each other's unstable mental state. The entire fantasy they built became an Ouroboros, with each girl's instability feeding the other. It was bound to become a calamity for someone, and unfortunately, that person ended up being Peyton. Along the way, they became convinced that Slenderman had told them that the only way to keep themselves and their family safe was to kill someone for him, to prove they were worthy. Their plan, thus, became to kill Peyton, and prove that Slenderman was real. 5 hours after the attack on Peyton, the pair were apprehended by police on I-94. The pair claimed they were on their way to meet Slenderman in his home called Slender Mansion, in a national forest over 200 miles from where they were captured. During the first interviews, which were conducted with no counsel or guardian present, Morgan seemed to have absolutely no empathy, while Anissa did seem to show some guilt for what had been done. However, they were both resolutely convinced that the killing had to take place in order to appease Slenderman. During psychiatric evaluations, Morgan admitted to having hallucinations beginning in early childhood, and was later diagnosed with early-onset schizophrenia. Her mother even corroborated much of what Morgan told them, saying that Morgan often would be conversing with unseen people, behaved like a cat, claimed to see unicorns, among other things. She believed that she had relationships with Voldemort and Severus Snape, and even claims to have conversed with one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Morgan was admitted to a mental health facility initially to determine if she was competent to stand trial. During that time, she was medicated and eventually returned to the county jail to await her trial. However, her mental health continued to deteriorate, and during her trial, she was committed to the facility that had previously treated her. Morgan was charged with attempted first-degree murder, and Anissa attempted second-degree homicide, a Class A and Class B felony, respectively. In 2017, Anissa pleaded guilty, but was later found not guilty by reasons of insanity or mental defect by the jury. Morgan followed suit, pleading guilty and then being found not guilty by the jury after they learned of her schizophrenia diagnosis. That's not to say that they did not receive punishment. Anissa was sentenced to 25 years to life, 3 of which were to be served in confinement and involuntary treatment at a state forensic psychiatric institute, followed by communal supervisions until she's 37 years old. In an update, she was released in 2021 under 24/7 monitoring via ankle bracelet, and has to ask permission to leave Waukesha County. Morgan has also been seeking an early release, citing tremendous improvements in her mental health. As of this writing, there do seem to be things in place for her to be released into a communal home where she's supposed to be until 2056, likely under similar conditions of a monitoring by an ankle bracelet. However, I can't say that for certain. There are other things around Morgan and some of her recent moves to try and secure an early release, but I feel those are her business and don't really have much bearing on what happened in 2014. The information's out there for those who are curious or want to look into this case for themselves. As for Peyton, she still bears the scars of that day, both physical and non-physical. She said that she's tried not to think about the physical scars too much, and when asked what she would say to Morgan if she ever saw her again, Peyton's answer was, "I'd thank her." The reason being that, in the wake of that terrible attack, Peyton herself has been inspired to go into a career in medicine. All told, this entire case is just very, very terrifying. To think someone that's your best friend one day is luring you into the woods the next day, attacking you and then leaving you for dead. What a truly horrifying world we live in sometimes. But also, sometimes in the deepest darkness burns the brightest little lights. So, in this story, a few weeks ago, I was biking around downtown in the city that I live in and decided to explore, because it seemed like I'd found a park that was new to me. When I arrived, I saw that I was alone when this strange guy called me over, and I walked over to see what he wanted. And he said, "I know. You know what I want you to do." I instantly got this, weird feeling in my gut and instantly left on my bike feeling creeped out and anxious as hell. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I instantly started having weird thoughts. What would have happened had I stayed behind? Because I don't know if he was alone, because he was just standing there. There were concrete steps and I couldn't see on the other side behind him. So one of the thoughts I was having was that I could have been jumped. The other thought that I had was that I could have been assaulted. I'm just glad that I listened to my gut and left, though. Hello, Raven. I recently stumbled upon your podcast while drawing and doing puzzles a few days ago, and have enjoyed listening to them. I have a story that I'm not sure if it's a glitch in the Matrix or a UFO sighting, but I don't know where else to post this. So, this was back in probably 2020, when my family and I were driving home from a trip to Florida. I was in the back seat of the car and looking out the window at the clouds. I like to watch clouds and find images in them to draw. When I saw something in the sky. It was very high up, as high as one of those commercial planes that you see, but it didn't look like a plane at all. For a description, it was shaped sort of like an uppercase Y with 2 points going off of the front and one in the back. There was also barely any center to it, just 3 points that met in the middle. On top of this, there was a second object trailing behind the craft, which was shaped like a crescent moon. The thing is, I couldn't see anything attaching this crescent to the first craft. It was just floating behind it. The whole thing, both crafts, seemed to be made of metal, as it looked shiny. Something else that was weird was that the triangle craft was not moving with the long point first as planes do, but was rather moving as if the cockpit was directly in between the first 2 points where they met the center. I watched this thing in the sky for a few moments before I saw it go behind a cloud. I got out the old iPhone that I had so I could take a picture of it when it came back out from behind the clouds, but it never did. It just vanished. I never saw that strange of an aircraft again, and I'm still not sure what it was, because I've never seen any real aircraft that looked anything like it. Anyway, I hope this story makes it into a video or podcast, and thank you for taking the time to read it. I have other stories to share, ones that actually are creepy glitches, and maybe I will sometime. Dennis Lloyd Martin's story. I want to start this piece by saying that the case of young Dennis Lloyd Martin has very quickly become a far more intriguing story than I had ever dared to think that it might be. This case is actually quite unique among some of the NPCs that I've looked into and researched. And that's probably because this particular story is said to have paranormal aspects to it. So, my dear audience, today we're going to look into a case that's, while it certainly falls under some type of true crime umbrella, also brings that supernatural kind of mystique to it. Now let's jump into this one. I don't think that I would have to tell people just what a bizarre and creepy place that Appalachia can be. The stories that have come out of those ancient mountains and the valleys around them quite frankly speak for themselves. And I'm not just talking about the creepy ghost, cryptid, supernatural kind of stories. There are just as many unsettling true crime stories from this enigmatic region as well. I would know, as I've researched both sides of the coin. and I do have plans to do some Appalachia-themed pieces in the future. But even in a place known for some of its more unsettling happenings, the story of young Dennis Martin is especially disturbing, and is a tale that generations of children have grown up being told by their parents as a cautionary tale, spoken of in a hushed tone, around campfires by other children as they spun their own creepy version of the story, and speculated about the possible fate of the young boy. And, just right out the gate, this case hits a level that not a whole lot of such cases do. While in some communities it might not be uncommon for people to clam up and just not talk about a particular incident or individual, in the case of Dennis Martin, there have been people actively researching the case that have been threatened and told to keep their mouths shut about the entire Dennis Martin incident. So, Raven, if this gets us heat, I do apologize in advance. Oh, thanks, Tom, for the warning, I guess. So with some of this groundwork laid, let's get back to 1969 and the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. On June 14th of 1969, young Dennis and his older brother Doug Martin and some other children were camping in the national park and were planning to sneak up on and surprise the adults back at camp, when the group separated from the 6-year-old Dennis, who was wearing a bright red shirt, and therefore the other boys thought he would be a liability in their stealth approach. They sent him down the path back towards the adults and camp, while Doug and the others crept along the edge of the trees until they reached their parents. Upon arriving back at the camp, when Doug and the others asked about where Dennis was, they were informed that the adults had no idea where he was. In the immediate aftermath of Dennis's disappearance, the first strange stories emerged from witnesses that claimed to have heard a young boy scream in the woods on that day, with one family saying they saw a figure emerge from the bushes shortly after the scream, with something slung over its shoulder. In the first seconds of seeing the creature, the family thought it might have been a bear, but quickly realized that the figure was far too humanoid to be a bear. So, yes, my friends, in one of the most roundabout kind of write-ups I have ever done, today we're going to touch on the topic of the Tennessee Wild Man. Because, as far as a lot of accounts go, there is a strong connection between the infamous cryptid and the vanishing of young Dennis Martin. In fact, one of the park rangers has even been reported as flat out saying that one of the wild men took Dennis. For anyone remotely familiar with Appalachia, or the Smoky Mountains specifically, then you know that for generations the Tennessee Wild Man has just been a part of the history of the region. What, for some, is just a scary story to tell around a campfire before bedtime, to others is a terrifying fact of life. Since the 1800s, there have been stories of these wild men attacking and even abducting people, specifically women. Now, while the stories of them abducting women are possibly the most common, it's not women that are exclusively targeted by these creatures. So, if we, for the sake of argument, just assume that this cryptid does in fact exist, then it wouldn't be a stretch to see a creature that attacks and abducts human women as fully capable of, and willing to, attack an even more vulnerable child, and possibly abduct them. Especially if that child were, for instance, separated from their pack, and walking alone down an isolated park trail way up in the mountains. For just about any creature with a predatory kind of instinct, this would be too tempting a target to pass up. Now, while what the purpose might be for taking a child like Dennis is definitely open to speculation, I think we can all agree that the drive to abduct him for any reason is nothing short of predatory. However, we are immediately hit with the question of whether the instance of the scream and the figure carrying something over its shoulder are the same instance as that of Dennis Martin vanishing. This question comes about based on where Dennis was at the time of his disappearance, and where the subsequent search area was, and the location where the scream was heard, and said creature was witnessed. It would be nearly impossible, if not impossible, for anything or anyone to have crossed that distance in the elapsed amount of time between the occurrences. Despite these doubts, people who have alleged encounters with the Tennessee wild men will tell you that, for one of these creatures traversing that distance would be nothing, as one of the local names for the wild men are ridge runners. And when we think about how any creature is at its deadliest in its native environment, and couple that with the wild men's reputation for its agility and mobility, then it would fall into the category of plausible that such a creature would have little issue making that trek in the allotted time frame. The more disturbing angle to this comes in when you think about the fact that, even at the time of his disappearance, Dennis Martin was far from the first child to mysteriously vanish in the Smoky Mountains with no real explanation. Nor has he been the last. At this point, the phenomenon of children disappearing in the Smoky Mountains might have even supplanted those of women being targeted by the Tennessee wild men. What's truly unsettling is to consider are the possible motives for these abductions. But since tales of the wild men date all the way back to the 19th century, and we can categorically say that, should the wild man exist, especially in modern times, there would have to be wild men and not just one wild man. I think possible implications become clear, which only makes the thought of a child like 6-year-old Dennis Martin being taken by them all the more terrifying and downright bone-chilling. Dwight McCarter, a very decorated park ranger, was part of the search for Dennis, and he documented extensively his involvement in the search for the boy. He reported that they encountered multiple dog teams that had found no sign of him, and that it was as if he had dropped off the face of the earth. By the third day of the search, more than 300 people, including Green Berets, were in the park searching for any sign of the missing child. By day 5, the FBI was begrudgingly involved with William Martin, Dennis's father, personally reaching out to the then director Edgar J. Hoover by letter, asking for the Bureau to get involved in the search. There are FBI files associated with this case that contain redacted information. They did become involved due to the possible kidnapping theory. These files, however, say that they found no signs of evidence suggesting a kidnapping, and as such would not investigate further. Even 50 years later, this does remain a possibility as well for Dennis's disappearance. So, looking at a kidnapping theory, we need suspects to consider, right? So, who could have possibly kidnapped the unfortunate boy? Well, again, if you are familiar with the lore of Appalachia, you are likely familiar with the stories of the feral people, the literal wild men of the Appalachians. They're said to be cannibalistic and are often implicated when people go missing along the Appalachian Trail. Stories of these people date all the way back to a time before the Great Smoky Mountain National Park even existed, all the way back to the pioneer days, when each new hilltop, every new valley marked the beginning of the new frontier. The Andersons are one such example of a clan that isolated themselves up into the mountains and deepest parts of the woods, and are said to have devolved into a feral, incestuous, and cannibalistic pack of feral people. With stories such as these, it's not as far-fetched a theory as it first sounds. But before we start wrapping this whole thing up, I want to circle back to the original conversation about the potential cryptid connection to this story. You see, there are also stories of those things even older than the feral humans of the Smokies and Appalachians. There are stories of a time when men were paid by federal men to, quote, go hunting in the woods, around where, today, the national park exists. Many families that had homesteads there took the feds up on their offer, and once they were displaced by the government in order for the park to be established, all such, quote, hunting ceased. It's said that they were hunting what we call today the Tennessee wild man, or in this case, men. I mention this because I want to circle a bit further into our earlier narrative. Have fun wrapping your head around that statement. to day 5 of the search for Dennis Martin, when we have the Green Berets deployed to the park. While the Green Berets are an absolute beast of a fighting force, I think it's an interesting choice to send them into the national park, when I feel the Army Rangers may have been a bit more natural of a choice. It certainly implies some kind of combat was expected, or at least seen as a possibility, out there in those woods. Some, of course, based on history, like to say that, with the rumors that a wild man took Dennis, the Berets were sent in to, quote, finish the job of hunting down the infamous cryptid. Kind of like an Order 66 on the so-called Tennessee Wildmen. The sad outcome of this story, though, is mostly that we don't truly have one. We have no more answers today in 2025 than we did back in 1969, when young Dennis Lloyd Martin vanished in the woods of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park at only 6 years old. The only truly definitive traces the boy ever found were a set of footprints that went for a short distance. One foot was bare, while the other was clearly the imprint of a shoe, with the prints being consistent with those of a child in both size and gait. However, that trail didn't run very far, and no further evidence of what happened to him has ever been found. I think to any of us, the very notion of a child spending a single night alone in the wilderness is terrifying. But the thought of that child spending longer than that out there, perhaps amongst feral people, and slowly becoming one of them, is truly horrifying. Hello, I'm one of your listeners, and I thought I would send in some of my stories. I'll start with the ones that I've been thinking about recently. I recall becoming self-aware. I don't remember what age I was, but I think it was before I went to kindergarten. I woke up one day looking at my hands with the strangest feeling like I'm me. The strange thing is that I have some memories before that happened, and I remember thinking about things I shouldn't have understood at that age. In particular, I remember thinking about becoming self-aware, how it would be a major milestone for years to come, and I would try writing it down. Find a place to hide the paper so I might stumble across it when I was older. There was something I wanted to warn myself about too, a future event. But my mind jumped to a different topic, and I never wrote anything down. Second story. I think it was in 2nd grade going into 3rd grade, right after school got out for the summer. I had an extremely vivid dream, literally exactly like reality, where I was back for the next school year. I was so annoyed with it that I literally just skipped my summer. This wasn't like the first day of school, it was like I started halfway into the year or something. So I go home and the rest of the day played out like it normally would. But I remember it felt so long. It ended when I fell asleep in my dream. I was confused, waking up like, was that a dream? It felt like I lived out an entire day in the dream. Later after school went back into session, I had a day that played out exactly like the one in the dream did. I had problems differentiating between reality and my dreams that following year. Third, around the time of my second story is when I remember my first flash forwards starting. Let me explain what I mean by that. Randomly, I would have a quick flash of an image pop up in my mind, with a brief set of text describing the background context for it. These would always later happen, and I would flash back, in deja vu, to when I saw it for the first time. The text would always somehow apply to it as well. The first one I actually remember in full is kind of funny, although I was extremely mad when it happened to me. I believe it was during the summer leading up to my 6th grade year when I had the flash forward. I was given the perspective of standing behind a kid that I went to school with, bending over and grabbing a binder from a shelf at the far end of the classroom, with desks on either side. It was funny because you could see his butt showing. Apologies for being crass. In the image, the text said, "Your first Saturday school." So, come 6th grade, first period, math, the teacher was very particular about tardies. I hated her class, and her especially. You could be given a tardy while being in the room. Anyway, more or less that event played, and it caused me to get a Saturday school from the amount of tardies that I'd had. And most of which were from her because she was freaking ridiculous. They got more frequent as time went on, and looking back, they always highlighted a minor event in my young life. 4th story. Skipping past an event similar in type to this, more personal, doesn't involve death though. In 10th grade, we had a classmate die in a house fire right before Christmas. The last time I saw her, I had a voice pop up in my mind and say that I would never see her again. And I had images of her friends crying. I felt like she was going to die, but I didn't warn her because I had nothing to do with her at all. And how could she believe me anyway? I kind of feel guilty that I didn't warn her now, but I wasn't in the best spirits from being depressed from my home life at the time. 5th, on a different topic, a couple of years ago I tried working as a janitor. Terrible experience. While I was retrieving something from summer cleaning, I saw a figure peek around the corner at me, to a T section in the hallway. At first I thought it was my boss, but then I realized it was too tall. I got a little closer and realized that this thing had no discernible features. It was solid black, like a shadow, but 3D. The best I can compare it to is those old paranormal shows, like The Haunted with the CGI recreations of events. It looked exactly like one of the CGI shadow creature things. And 6th. This is my last one that I'll write. This is probably the only experience I've had that I think could be a glitch or something similar. I was standing out, waiting to be picked up from a school event, when I noticed a car approaching from the north. It looked to be some type of sedan, dark in color. To set the setting, there's hardly anything obstructing my view other than a few trees. Just as this vehicle would be obstructed for a second by one particular tree about a football field away, it just vanished. It was just inexplicably gone. So, this story is going to be a little different, but it still scares the hell out of me. So I wanted to share it. Several years back when I was still in my 20s and still running off of energy drinks and protein bars, I would party a lot. I was big into music, still am, but I would go to just about any concert that I could. I followed all my favorite bands like Hawks, and if they were even remotely close, I tried to go to the concert. I even liked going to some of these smaller, local, and cover bands. They were typically just as fun, and if anything, the drinks there would make it fun. This is where I kind of landed myself into some trouble. I'd been sick with the flu and was out of work for almost a week, which completely wrecked my paycheck. It was a little shorter, and I had some unexpected bills come up, so I was cutting it pretty close. But I was able to keep everything afloat. I finally got back to work, and my friend told me that one of our favorite bands was going to be coming to town. I was ecstatic. I hadn't seen these guys in a few years, and they put on one hell of a show. I don't want to say who it was, because I think a lot of people would be able to figure out my general location. Anyway, we for sure both wanted to get tickets, but I had to get paid again before I could even think about buying them. So, we waited anxiously to buy the tickets until the following week, slowly watching the amount left. I was getting nervous that they would sell out, finally, Friday came around, I got paid, so I went in to buy them. That is where the problems began. I went straight through the venue and they said they were sold out. I've run into that before, but typically they weren't actually, and they were just basically holding tickets back for purchase at the door. And so I tried a few ticket places online with no luck. I even physically went to the venue to see if I could just buy the tickets at the box office, and they said that they couldn't sell tickets for a future event. So I went back home empty-handed and upset that we probably wouldn't be able to make the concert. I started checking on some sites that I had used in the past to buy tickets that individuals were selling. People that couldn't go and now needed to sell them. And of course, the occasional scalper. I didn't want to go that path because I know that they were typically overpriced, and I really wanted to see these guys. I hadn't even been to an actual concert in a while due to life just getting in the way. So I made the decision to buy tickets from this person on said site. He claimed that he bought several tickets for him and his friends, but a few people canceled on him, so he was just trying to recoup some of the money they lost. He had a few general admission tickets, but then he also had some for the balcony area to the side. They weren't much more either. I believe $100 each versus about $60, so I asked for the balcony ones, knowing my friend would be super excited for it too. I paid him through PayPal, and he sent me a screenshot of the QR code and code for each ticket. I thanked him, and even told him that if he had another balcony one, that he was welcome to join us since he saved me some stress. And he agreed, saying he'd be happy to. I didn't mind, he just made our entire night, and now I was back to being excited for this concert. So fast forward 2 weeks to the night of the concert. We were both dressed up and looking nice, and standing in the already long line to get in. We finally got to the front of the line, and the girl there first looked at my paper that I printed out with the codes like she was confused. I remember her mumbling something and then trying to scan the code. It clearly didn't capture it. She said that it wasn't accepting it, and she asked me where I bought the tickets from. I explained that it was from an individual trying to sell tickets that he had bought, and then she asked me to show her the confirmation that I got from it. I explained how I paid via PayPal, and he just emailed me the screenshots. She then asked us to stand to the side for her manager, and that's when I started to get concerned. What was wrong with my tickets? Finally, the manager showed up and I explained everything to him, and he explained that the tickets appeared to be fake. I was shocked and scared. I showed him the payment and the email, freaking out thinking that he may have thought we faked the tickets. He apologized and assured us that he believed us, that we were just victims. But he asked if he could keep the papers that I printed to report to the police about the fakes, explaining how it's all been pretty bad. He even showed us what their codes looked like, pointing out that it was long and almost barcode-like, not the normal square QR code. He then gave us a few suggestions, like trying to fight it with PayPal or the bank to get our money back. Unfortunately, since it was inside, he couldn't let us in, but he said that if we waited around for everyone else to get in, then we could be first to buy any remaining tickets. He also gave both of us a free t-shirt for the venue, which was really nice of him. We thanked him for trusting us, and he went back inside, leaving us to wait and watch all of these other people go in. The line seemed never-ending, and to be honest, that was pretty discouraging. We were both thinking that they weren't going to have any tickets left, and standing there was just making us feel worse, so we decided to just pass on the whole thing. We instead went to a little bar and grill for dinner and drinks, then went to another bar for even more drinks. We blasted the band's music, and even the Uber driver got into it and played it for us. Maybe it was because we were pretty drunk, but he also did get a pretty big tip from us too. We were upset that we didn't get to go to the concert, and that I was out $200, but We ended up making a great night out of it anyways, and we were thankful for everyone involved. We ended up back at my place, and my friends stayed there. The next morning, my phone was blowing up with texts and missed calls. People asking if we were okay, to answer ASAP and call people back. My sister, my mom, a few friends. I was trying to figure out what the heck was with all the worried messages. I started with my sister and said that I was home and asked why, explaining that we didn't go to the concert. While I was responding to my mom, my sister called me. I was not expecting what she told me. She said that there was some kind of fight that broke out at the concert, and someone started shooting people. One person had died, and several more were injured. I was shocked. I told her that we never even got in, and I could hear the relief in her voice. She said that she would send me the news article, and I let her go so I could respond to everyone else. I got up and went to the living room to check on my friend, who was still ungracefully passed out. I woke her up and told her what had happened, and she seemed to have the same reaction that I did, grabbing her phone and seeing all the missed calls and texts. We sat there clearing through all the messages, and I finally got to read the story. It said that there was some kind of altercation, and someone was asked to leave. That's when the person pulled out a weapon. It didn't say what they had, but then another person brandished a gun and began shooting. They shot the guy that first had a weapon, and then shot someone else nearby, which was the person that died. Then several others were shot. It also didn't specify if there was another shooter or if it was all the same guy, but both people that had weapons, or started it, had been arrested. It was even on the news later that night as they interviewed some concert goers. The place looked like a mess. Some people looked terrified and were crying. I was just in shock. We were supposed to be at that very concert, and because we wouldn't even have been on the balcony, if we got in at all, we would have been on the floor, and probably near the back too, since we would have been one of the last ones in. Since the shooting took place close to the door, as the person was being escorted out, we could have been right there by it, possibly shot, maybe killed. It was way too close for comfort, and I had to talk my friend down from a full-blown panic attack, both of us getting that survivor's guilt in a way. We were upset about being out $200 when others were right there in that moment, struggling to survive or get away. Or maybe even grieving over a friend, or a family member, or a partner that they'd lost. Things were a bit weird for us for a few days. We certainly couldn't bring ourselves to listen to their music the days following, and I still felt a twinge of guilt when something negative happened. Like, I had no right to be upset. But over time, we both got better about it. It was an awful thing to happen, and we respected the situation for what it was. But I just became incredibly thankful for how things turned out for us. Getting scammed was potentially a lifesaver for us, and I don't take that lightly now. It did take a while before either of us wanted to go to another concert, but eventually we did. And thankfully, there have been no other incidents like that. Now I just have a handful of people that require me to message them before we go, and after, which I can live with. I won't take these fateful moments for granted anymore. I'm adding this little intro part because for some reason it feels like it's necessary, because some people seem to not understand that whenever I read Tom K's write-ups, it's not my opinions, they are his opinions. Me reading his write-ups are not endorsements of his opinions, and all opinions stated in this are his, not mine. I know nothing of Hank Williams Jr., unfortunately, or fortunately, and as such, I do not have a personal opinion. However, his story is one that fits this category, and definitely deserves to be read, so here we go. To anyone that has listened to music any time since the 1970s, then you've probably encountered the music of the man called Hank Williams Jr. The man, the myth, the legend. And while these days Bocephus may fall on my list of highly problematic people, even I can't deny that the man has built a legend for himself that has surpassed even that of his incredibly famous and beloved father, Mr. Hank Williams Sr. Even the most problematic of people can sometimes have a really inspiring story. Hank Williams Jr. is definitely one of those people. Despite how you feel about some of his beliefs, the story of his life is definitely a very compelling one. It truly has everything one could ask for in a truly great story. And even if it's someone that I may have some mixed feelings about, I cannot ever deny that Junior has definitely earned his right to be problematic in ways. After the things that Bocephus has endured, I think anyone would develop certain quirks and opinions, and that's okay even if not everyone agrees with his views. We have to remember the human side of things. Even people we don't agree with still deserve to have their stories told and heard, and Junior has risen up from the lowest of lows, from death's very doorstep, to one of the most famous and undeniably talented performers of certainly my lifetime. Following the tragic loss of his father in 1953, when Junior was only 4 years old, it wasn't long before he was being groomed by his mother to more or less become a Hank Williams impersonator, taking stage for the first time at the age of 8, singing his father's songs. And by 14, Junior was doing imitation performances, singing songs that were associated with his legendary father. In 1963, Hank Williams Jr. made his television debut on The Ed Sullivan Show, performing several of his father's songs. The following year, he would perform on Shindig, and long before Junior was making some very serious waves in the music business, he began struggling to find his own voice and identity. His mother, Audrey Williams, was overbearing, and she had her own plan in mind for the young star. She wanted to recreate her late husband's success, and she wanted to use Junior to do so. By the 1970s, Junior was completely disillusioned with the way his career was going, and he severed all ties with Audrey. And by the middle of the decade, Junior would be finding that style and sound that would go on to make him one of the most famous country singers in the entire world, and make him the superstar that he's regarded as today. However, there was a tragedy looming for the up-and-coming star that threatened everything he had worked so hard to achieve. In the mid-1970s, Junior began falling into a pattern of drug and alcohol abuse. His music was becoming incredibly successful, and with success came all of its trappings and temptations. In an attempt to refocus his creative energy and bring stability to his troubled personal life, Bocephus moved to Alabama and began performing southern rock-style music with the outlaw musicians such as Waylon Jennings and Charlie Daniels. In 1975, his album Hank Williams Jr. and Friends was released. This album was the fruits of the collaborations Junior had been pursuing with Waylon and other artists. Before Junior could even begin to enjoy the success of his project, that looming tragedy, that sword of Damocles, that I mentioned before, would find its chance to strike. And when it did, it would leave Hank Williams Jr. fighting for his very life. On August 8th of 1975, Junior was in southwestern Montana along the Continental Divide, scaling Ajax Peak. The snow beneath his feet would give way, and Junior would fall more than 500 feet to the rocks below. The tumble down the mountain left Junior nearly dead, and left everyone else wondering if he would survive. And even if he did survive, would he ever be the same as he was before the accident? The resulting injuries were extensive and severe, and would certainly fall into the category of life-changing. With multiple skull and facial fractures, it would take 2 years, 17 surgeries, and extensive rehabilitation as Junior learned how to walk, talk, and sing all over again. Between the injuries and the surgeries, Junior's face was left disfigured. One of the fractures had caused his right eye to pop out of its socket and resulted in its loss, leaving him completely blind on the right side. Due to the severity of the scars, Junior changed his entire look, adopting the style that is his trademark look, donning a full beard and sunglasses to cover the deep scars of that terrible fall down the mountain in Montana. In the years since, Junior has gone on to success that few people have attained. He continued his collaboration style with other artists to this day, and has performed with artists such as Kid Rock, Merle Haggard, Gretchen Wilson, and as recently as 2024, Post Malone. All in all, Hank Williams Jr., regardless of what people may think of his politics, has recovered from tragedies that would have left a lot of people completely despondent. From the loss of his father at such a young age, through the pressures and stress his mother put on him when she was trying to recreate that career path of her late husband, all the way to his personal struggle with drugs and alcohol, and one of the most harrowing near-death experiences I have ever heard. Not only has he recovered from them, but he's gone on to become one of the most legendary figures in the music industry. Today, there are artists that cite him as their inspiration, and made them want to become a musician. He could also be credited for bringing that eclectic blending of style that so many people, including myself, are such massive fans of. Hey Raven, this happened to my dad Mike last week, and he told me that I could post it on here, so here I go. I should preface this by saying that my entire family is religious, including myself. Last weekend, my dad developed a heat stroke that put him down for several days. During that time, my dad prayed that he would be able to get closer to God. He felt like he wasn't a good enough Christian. Literally the next day, my dad got into his partner's, that's work partner, not life partner, van and found a coin sitting on the sheet. His partner came out and told him that he found the coin and thought of my dad, knowing that he's a Christian. He read the first two lines and thought it was a really cool message, and then he put it away. When he got home, he read the entire thing front and back. I have a couple of pictures of the coin so you can see for yourself. I hope this makes it into a video, as I'm a really big fan of the channel. I'm not sure how you want to categorize this one, Raven. It's a familiar subject, but one I haven't heard you cover, and it's courtesy of the least likely source, my dad. We call my dad the world's greatest skeptic. But there are two exceptions to this disbelief. He can witch water, which was a huge shock to him, and he has seen spontaneous human combustion. I've known about the latter for most of my life, but he's never been willing to talk about it when I asked him. Last month, though, I was working on something in the kitchen as he was doing the dishes, and he asked offhand if the subject of spontaneous human combustion ever came up in my studies. Well, it never came up in my forensic anthropology studies, but I have studied the phenomenon for reasons I'll have to tell you about some other time. So I responded, casually, so as not to scare him into silence, that the sources I've seen generally concluded that it was unexplained. He agreed that it was true of his experience, too. Mind you, even decades after retirement, Dad is a firefighter to the bone. Even after he became disabled, he trained others, instituted changes in the local volunteer fire department that made fire insurance available for our rural area for the first time ever, and sent reports to insurance companies when he recognized the signs of arson. In short, he knows his stuff, but he had no explanation for what he found that day. It happened early in his career, 1959 or 1960, in Santa Rosa, California. They arrived at the scene due to a neighbor reporting smoke. When they arrived, the captain took one sniff of the air and announced that someone was dead and burned inside the house. How did he know? Maybe from his years of experience as a firefighter. Maybe he was a World War II veteran. Dad didn't know. But when they got inside, they found a man dead on the armchair with not much left of him but parts of his extremities and some cremains. But nothing else in the room was burned, and even the chair had little damage. Apparently, it freaked everyone out enough that no one talked about it after. As far as Dad knows, there was no investigation. Dad didn't have anything else to say about that, but it wasn't the end of the conversation. I'm not going to betray any confidences, but I want to tell you all that what haunts my dad all these years later isn't the mysterious fate of that individual. What haunts Dad is the eventual fate of his captain. People, you gentlemen in particular, please hear me. The most courageous thing you can ever do in your life is to ask for help. When things get bad, please find the courage to seek help. Don't try to self-medicate with substance and never assume that you are alone. More people care about you than you have any idea of. They are willing to help, and will bear the scars for life if your problems overwhelm you and they don't realize it's happening until it's too late. That's the end of my PSA. Just remember, as Raven keeps telling us, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, and don't forget it.